Bon, les gars, voilà, c'est 5 heures du matin, il a du bon café, tout ça. Bonne séance. Oh, hey there. Man, you can't. All right. What's happening? I said, man, what's up with this camera? It's not trying to. Yeah, there you go. Cheers. How's it going? Got another great installment of the deciphering, decoding, and decrypting of the matrix. And yeah, pardon my French, but
Château Aubryon, 1959. Magnificent wine. I love French wine. Like I love the French language. I have sampled every language. French is my favorite. Fantastic language. Especially to curse with. Nom de Dieu, de putain de bordel de merde de saloperie de connard d'enculé de ta mère. It's like wiping your ass with silk. I love it.
You know why we are here.
I am a trafficker of
But do you know why you're here? Cheers. So, mes pitons, les gars, allez, il faut rigoler un petit peu avec les Français. C'est pas trop compliqué. Mais oui. Again, I'm going to keep saying this every time I show this clip because, the majority of French people do not act that way. They're not some arrogant little fucking prick who thinks they fucking know it all, In fact, it seems like a good amount of Americans act that way. And even in this fucking truth-seeking, speaking realm, a lot of folks be jumping the gun on and jumping to conclusions on shit they only halfway understood or even fucking delved into. Take it to the trivium. You got to get the knowledge first so you can properly understand everything to speak the rhetoric effectively, right? So, yeah, introducing Brandon Martin. I'm going to be showcasing his matrix decipherage of this trilogy. And he's going to take a really cool esoteric approach. He has a really cool background. We've interviewed him on Dissolving the Divide, actually. You can check us out over there. You can check out his websites at See Truth Academy. Really cool website. They have they put out at least 5 conferences now, with the Metamorphosis being the last one. I've had, friends like Dorian Greens, Brandon Spencer, Logan Hart, Chris Jansen, and Leslie Powers, who've been, participating in these things year in, year out. So, yeah, a great hub of information to go check out. And, yeah, speaking of tailing back to the whole, the trivium stuff and how people be talking out of their asses a little too much and not understanding the whole historicity of, masonry and just like the term free mason. Like centuries ago, these were the master builders, throughout society, and they had certain, skill sets and techniques that were in pretty high demand. And so they were allowed to freely cross borders and territories without getting fucked up, taxed, or whatever, right? So yeah, of course, there's the dark occult, and it's not just the dull Illuminati who've infiltrated, that stuff and yada yada. But if you read some of these books, there's a lot of great philosophy to Freemasonry, and yeah, Nate Kapp was on our show Dissolving the Divide as well to speak about that. That was awesome. You can check out his works at seatruth.com, and Cubby Hole. And that's whole, like keeping it whole, complet, les gars. So yeah, so we're gonna rewind, reload the Matrix, and this is like a daily thing for a lot of people. We're like Mario West says, we're waltzing in and out of the Matrix. And like the allegory of the movie is to, okay, once you wake up and exit out of the Matrix, we got to keep going back into, unplug the other, sleepwalkers, right? Because who is ultimately holding up, the slave system, everyday people. You know, if you know, it's like this the elites, the 1%. You know, well, okay, 1%. How come 99.9% of the population can't fucking get together and take care of one fucking percent? Is it because that that 1% holds that super occulted knowledge like that Merovingian, and he's quite stingy, man, with sharing that knowledge. So there's a power differential, and you see the dynamics of the master-slave relationship, So anyways, kind of like a narcissist victim abuse, these vicious cycles, we got to cut them the fuck out, cut the cord. We got to build something better in this place. So without further ado, let's get this going. Once again, this is going to be about almost 3 hours long. Ready for this? Again, this is by Brandon Martin. I think he put this out a couple years ago, and reached out to him actually, and he'll be looking to do a part 2 pretty soon. So it's something to look forward to, and I hope I gave him a little motivation to get that out sooner than later. So yeah, enjoy. Thanks for coming by.
Hello and welcome, one and all. My name is Brandon Martin, and thanks to all of you who are joining me to take a deep dive into the philosophical and allegorical nature of the Matrix Trilogy. This is a presentation that I put together called The Matrix Trilogy Deciphered, Part 1 of 3. You can find more of my work at the Cubbyhole website, that's CUBBYWHOLE.com, and also you can find more of my content at the OneGreatWorkNetwork.com website. So that's OneGreatWorkNetwork.com, and you can go to the content creator page, and then you'll find me, Brandon Martin, there, along with all kinds of other top caliber content creators from all over the place. I think it's a very, very great site for people to look into if they're interested in looking more into the occult or the esoteric knowledge that pertains to the current human condition. Before we get into the material, a little caveat here. To gain the most from this presentation, I highly recommend that you start at episode 1 of the Cubbyhole podcast and chronologically move through those episodes. There's going to be a lot of prerequisite knowledge that comes from the podcast and the material we lay on the podcast. It's me and Nathan Kapnicki, who's the main host of the podcast, that pertains to what we're going to be talking about here. Now, this presentation was directly inspired by Mark Passio's presentation, The Matrix Decoded, back in, I believe, 2015 at Free Your Mind 2. It might be 14, I could be mistaken about that, but he presented it at Free Your Mind 2, and he did a wonderful job. Unfortunately, the video and audio quality is lacking. So I thought, since The Matrix 4 is coming out, why not revisit this amazing allegorical trilogy, and why not add a little bit more to that and expand upon what Mark has laid down. So you're going to be hearing some, or maybe a lot, of information that was in that presentation. I'm not trying to be redundant with the information, but I think that a higher quality version of that would be nice. Plus, I will bring new stuff to the table to, top it off with my own personal studies and research and what I have personally pulled out from this amazing trilogy. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The Matrix Trilogy is a direct allegorical reference to the current human condition and the prison planet that we are all living in. And it also is a initiation of sorts for the viewer to actually become aware of not only how to awaken themselves out of the trance of the Matrix, but also how to actually make real and positive change in the world. The Matrix deals with a vast variety of philosophical ideas and premises specifically in the epistemological realm and how we can justify knowledge itself, the knowledge of reality, because it does make us question, almost in a way of, challenging existentially our ideas of what is truth. What is the truth about nature? What is the truth about the human condition? What is the truth about our minds and our psyche? And how can we define what is real? And through this epistemological exploration, we find ourselves dealing with very metaphysical concepts. We're going to see more often than not a approach to try to balance the things between the metaphysical and the physical, the world of reality and the world of illusion. The Matrix deals with the branch of philosophy known as epistemology, which has to do with the extent of the justification for knowledge. What is knowledge? How do we know that we can know? Absolutely. How can we define objectiveness? Since we're dealing with the basis of the justification for knowledge, then we're also dealing with how we define objective truth. And this is something that we see come up a lot in the Matrix trilogy. The whole first movie is about what the Matrix is. And in extension, it is about what truth actually is. And really, it's about the human condition and how we've created that human condition. So the second movie is about why we're in that condition. And the third movie is the solution to that. So what we're really seeing is a triune aspect of knowledge gathering. We need to know that there is a problem. We need to understand what created the problem. And then we need to understand how to solve the problem. And that's why I really like it in this threefold aspect, because it really does define a problem-solving methodology very well. And I feel, and many others have stated this, that the second and third movie didn't do as well because people didn't like the message that it sent. I really think that was the big issue in people's mind. A lot of people will give you this excuse that it's because of the CGI, while they simultaneously watch one of their crappiest CGI film favorites of theirs. It's absolutely ridiculous. The most important part is what you can learn from it in relation to reality and how you can make use of that knowledge. I think they did very well. Ever since I watched the whole trilogy, I felt that they did very good at depicting the ideas of why we're in the Matrix in the second one and how do we get out of the Matrix in the third one. How do we solve the issue? It's not just how we get out of the Matrix, right? It's how we get out of the mind cage, the entire issue that's plaguing humanity. And it's actually interesting because the third movie actually ends on a very positive note in some people's points of view. I have contention with that to a certain level, but I do think it's a better ending than most films that depict a totalitarian state like this. Also, we have to recognize that it is a revelation of the method when it comes to cinematography and when it comes to occult knowledge. There is also deep significance to the predictive programming, the subliminal symbolism within the film, and lots of other philosophical concepts that we will be touching upon. In my point of view, films like this are direct product placement, but it's product placement for a new type of metaphysics or a new type of axiom belief systems that actually serve to promote the control system. It's really hard to say that, especially about a movie that pertains to an individual becoming awakened, right? So it's really hard for people to see that because the nature of that is very sublime and sophisticated when it comes to it. But by the end of this 3-movie breakdown, I hope that you will see that. Now, this first part, I'm not going to be getting deeply into that product placement, but in the second and third I will be showing how this is an overarching agenda that can be related back to Huxley's A Brave New World and the transhumanistic agenda and the final revolution that Huxley spoke about. So to simplify this here, I do think that this is product placement for transhumanism and the fake revolution, which is also known as the final revolution. That doesn't mean that there isn't truth in this film, though. There's a lot of good things that we should take from this film. We just need to be very careful when it comes to how these films mold and direct us into certain types of behaviors. So we need to be prudent when we're actually influenced by these things, because the sorcerer, his job or her job is to make sure to plant his ideas into your mind. And without the true understanding of the occult or, philosophy, then it's very simple to actually manipulate you by hiding the agenda between the truth. If we take a step back and look at it holistically, we can see that there definitely is a Gnostic influence, which includes a lot of Freemasonry, which I'll be mainly focusing on, but also Kabbalah. There's a lot of Kabbalistic traditions that is correlated with this, which doesn't seem to be surprising considering that all the mystery traditions are interconnected and related to each other at a specific level. So when you're looking at Freemasonry, you can definitely extract a lot of information about the Kabbalah or the Kabbalah. And all of the mystery traditions are veiled in allegory. So let's start off with what is an allegory. An allegory is a story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one, or a philosophical one. And the word allegory comes from Greek, allos, which means other, and agoria, or agora, which means speaking in assembly, or speaking together. Also, the root of allos is al, which means beyond or out of. So it means to pull out. It means to pull hidden information out of something, specifically in reference to teach us something about ourselves and the world that we're living in. It is where we are unveiling or revealing the hidden information that has deep philosophical meaning that helps us to evolve our species and to raise consciousness at a fundamental level into a higher state of being and awareness. It also helps to preserve a lot of the mythology, the underlying symbolic essence of what we're trying to get through with the story. So it's about really preserving the true essence, the true meaning of the actual story. The basic allegory of the Matrix is a reference to the overarching control system that we are currently living in, and definitely about the hidden forces that are dictating and controlling the system from behind the scenes. The dark occultists is what I like to refer to them as. So in this way, it is about social engineering and the social engineers. So this really gives us the knowledge in an allegorical way to understand how these forces work, and also how we can fight against them. The way that it gives us this knowledge about how we fight against them is through the hidden key within the allegory to help us unlock the secrets of the occult knowledge that is required to further progress humanity. And at a deeper esoteric level, it is a direct Freemasonic allegory. One can say that all allegories are truly Freemasonic if you understand what Freemasonry actually is, not what the lodge system is, but what the tradition and ideology actually is. So Freemasonry is a system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. As we see on the screen here, I have the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry. These are known as tracing boards, which is not to be confused with trestle boards. Though often the word is used synonymously, they do represent 2 different implements, one being more for speculative and the other being more for operative masons. The first degree tracing board is known as the entered board, which is also a representation of Solomon's temple. It is simply a mirror of our own psyche or consciousness, of our true higher self. So it represents the aspects of our self and also our physical world, the macrocosmic and the microcosmic. This board itself holds a plethora of knowledge that I'm not going to be getting into, but in simple terms, the initiate must have the desire to know the truth and then also seek to work on himself and build himself up into a higher, more perfected being. The entered apprentice is all about the progression from darkness into light, or removing one's own chains of ignorance so that he may come into attainment of true knowledge of the self and the laws in which The self has to operate within. These are the moral and spiritual laws that bind us all and help us all to grow and evolve into better beings and to create a better world. The entered apprentice has a deep desire, and his mind is filled with an increasing wonder or awe, and this is actually the intensity, the resolve that actually leads him to the truth. We see this play out with Neo in this film. This corresponds to the first movie because it is all about what the Matrix is, what the truth is, what the illusion is, what the ego illusion is that is holding us back from actually attaining our own self-evolution. As we see on the slide here, we have Morpheus being represented by the pillar of Jachin, or Jachin, which represents the thought, the masculine components of our consciousness and our self. It also represents strength, and we can see throughout the film how much integrity and resolve through strength and courage that Morpheus truly has. We have Trinity on the right-hand pillar of beauty, and this represents the sacred feminine component to our consciousness, which is emotions. We have Neo over top of the ionic pillar, which is the pillar of wisdom. This is the middle path, and we can see that this is about the I being on. Ionic is a play on the word, which means the I is on. It's also a reference to a charged particle. So Neo turns his eye on in the film, and we see one eye symbolism later in the film. I also find it interesting that Cypher is on the far left side of this image, which gives us the correlation to his rigid skepticism and his lack of faith or loyalty to the crew. It shows his chronic left brain imbalance, which eventually leads him into a chronic right brain imbalance. The entered apprentice degree is also correlating directly to the video game Enter the Matrix. So I find that very interesting that they are so blatant with their symbolism in this. Moving on, we have the second degree board, which is the past, or the fellowcraft. This represents the emotions, because this is all about the internal work, the hidden mysteries within. This is about going into the temple and dealing with all the stuff, all the negative stuff that's in these dark rooms inside the temple. And you have to go in there and turn the light on and shine the light in these rooms, which is interesting because we do see that play out in the second film, and I'll explain that when we get to that part. The second film is a direct reference to the second degree of Freemasonry, which also correlates to the why we are in the Matrix and why we are enslaved. It deals with the causal factors, or that which led us to this current condition. The third tracing board represents the raised initiate. This is the third degree of Freemasonry, also known as the Master Mason, and it's correlated to action. If the entered apprentice represented the youth, then the fellowcraft represents manhood, and the Master Mason represents old age or elderly. The final degree is about death and resurrection of oneself. Not literal death, but metaphorical death. A second birth into your new being. And it also is about the revealing of the ultimate truth that one can hold in physical form. One gains the understanding of the sublime nature of the mystery traditions. There is no way I could explain all these in full detail, but I do highly recommend that any individual that's interested in a further study of this to dive into this subject, because you will gain great knowledge from it. Another critical point that needs to be made here is that the first 3 degrees and the first 3 movies of The Matrix relate directly to the trivium, which is grammar, logic, and rhetoric, or thought, emotion, and action, or input, processing, output. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the actual film. The first thing that people need to know is a little bit of background about how the Matrix came into being. And you can find this information in the anime called Animatrix. The Animatrix is a prequel series that deals with the backstory of the Matrix series, including the original war between humankind and the machines, which led to the creation of the Matrix, in addition to providing side stories that expand the overall universe and ties them into the main film series. The episode The Second Renaissance, which deals with the history of how the machines were built and oppressed by man as they gained sentience and self-awareness. Mankind attempted to destroy them when they became jealous and fearful, and the machines ended up fighting back. Mankind lost a long war for its life and became enslaved in the Matrix, plugged into machines, enchanted in the mind by a fake reality while their bodies were being used as energy sources. This war was obviously massive in scale, and the conflict was brutal, and it resulted in the enslavement of the human species. This was jarring to look at, but like other Matrix movies, The Animatrix is a movie that has hope for mankind to break free of its oppressive state. The second Renaissance in The Animatrix is my personal favorite because it tells how mankind, as the narrator says, became the architect of its own demise. Now this is going to play into the allegory of what I feel is extremely important to get the real picture, the holistic picture of the Matrix. It touches on the idea of how oppressing sentient life and denying them rights will only lead to them believing it is okay to do the same to us. Kind of like a child. Like raising a child into believing that it's okay to, you know, deny individual rights. Like you can actually deny anybody any kinds of rights. Every being has equal amount of rights in the world, and you can't deny beings those rights. You can oppress them to make them not exercise those rights, but you can't really strip them away. They are inherent. They are always a gift of creation, and they are always present for us. It shows us how our egotistical, greedy, merciless, and hubris behavior leads us to our own self-destruction, and more specifically, the lack of living in accordance with the laws of nature and respecting individual liberty and each individual's rights. On the surface level of the film, there does seem to be a lot of transhumanistic notions being put forward by the Wachowskis. Each individual that is logged in or jacked into the Matrix has these ports from which you could gather that they are part machine and part human. They're not completely human, and we see that later on with the Children of Zion, where they do not have these ports and they are not merged with the machine at that level. So it's interesting to note that the savior of the film is actually part machine. We do have to deal with these fundamental ideas as we start to break down this film, because it does have a lot of connections to a transhumanistic agenda and worldview. If we haven't already progressed to the point that we do have sentient AI systems out there, and I would be very surprised if we don't at this point with everything that I've seen. It's coming very soon. It's coming in the near future. So how are we going to deal with this if this actually does come about? How do we deal with this on an epistemological level, an ontological level, and a moral level, right? So this does deal with this issue as we push forward into our future. And in my point of view, any being that becomes sentient, even if it is of our own creation, like our children, deserves to have the equal respect, just as we all should be equally respected when it comes to individual liberty and the rights of sentient beings. But I more so look at this like the robots in the Animatrix are the lower class of society. And I think that's the allegory here that we should stick with, that the robots that are being oppressed are the everyday people like you and me. The robot is a allegory for the worker and the consumer, and we're all workers and consumers here in the world. At least most of us are workers, but we're definitely all consumers in this world. We also have to recognize that the robot is associated to the left brain aspects. And in this story, where the robots or the AI systems that eventually do enslave humanity because of their lack of understanding of natural law. This brings me back to the old Nietzsche quote, "Be careful those who wish to battle monsters, because you may become the monster in their stead." That's not verbatim, but that's pretty much what he's saying, is that a lot of times when you're trying to battle the evils of the world, you have to be careful because you're getting very close to that line where you're capable of going and becoming that evil in its stead. And the thing that ties us back is true principles, first principles, that holds us in place with our foundations of morality. We have to have those as our basis to move forward. Otherwise, we're just going to continue this cycle of slavery. And that's what this is depicting. So I will be talking about this later on because it does have precedence with what I'm going to be explaining, especially when it comes to transhumanism as we move forward here. But I just wanted to give a little bit of the understanding of how the war began, which is that we created sentient robots, or we created beings that were of capabilities with equal rights, and then we oppressed them and warred against them because we felt superior and we felt a deep psychology of fear towards what they represented. By doing this, by constantly warring against these sentient beings, they eventually rose up and started to fight back, and then eventually it led us into the cycle of us being enslaved by them. They eventually became the abuser and us the victim. So this plays into that abuse-victim cycle very deeply. The Matrix is an example of this cyberpunk subgenre of science fiction. The Wachowskis' approach to action scenes was influenced by the Japanese animations and martial art films of the East, and the film's use of fight choreographers and wire fu techniques from Hong Kong action cinema influenced Hollywood action film productions throughout the next few decades. So we know that the film popularized the cinema technique known as bullet time, which heightened the perception of certain characters represented by allowing the action within a shot to progress in slow motion while the camera appeared to move through the scene at normal speed, allowing a sped up movements of certain characters to be perceived normally. I find it very interesting that if we look at cinema throughout history, we find that cinema changes upon the decade, just like music does. I mean, think about your music genres. They change every decade, right? And I feel that this is a really good example of how controlled these mediums really are. And it just shows, for example, The Wizard of Oz, 1939. In that movie, you have it going from black and white to color, which represents that transitional period of the technology, but also ideologically it represents coming from something that's more fantasy based into something that's more realistic, because we see things in color. So the movie that was in black and white is actually less like reality than the one that's in color. But it's also blurring the lines between reality and fiction in that. But it's also at the end of the decade. You know, it's at the final phase of the decade. And what do you know? The Matrix was made or released in 1999. And what did it do? It also blurred the lines between reality and fiction. And it, subsequently ended up, promoting new styles of cinematography and cinema technique throughout the next few decades, and we saw all kinds of films take from that. This cyberpunk genre, well, it's like a goth cyberpunk genre because of the clothes that they wear, the black leather stuff, which is interesting. It's really like product placement, but it's not product placement in your normal sense of, a Coke can here or a burger or something like that, right? Or some kind of corporate advertisement. It's product placement for a new type of ideology. It's product placement for a new type of metaphysical axioms to program the people with, and we can see where that's kind of taken us into our current day and age with these types of films. It also reminds me of older films like Tron, right? So that also is controlled engineering, So this is all connected. The reason why I'm saying this is because it's about a revolution of the method. And in a way, we can say that some of these movies have helped promote some of the false revolutions that we see currently in our modern day. Now, one of my favorite animes of all time, and it's an anime that I actually broke down a few years ago, is called Ghost in the Shell. It's one of my favorite animations that has ever been done. It has such an amazing allegory in it, and it dives deep within the transhumanistic agenda and the questions of ontology, the existential crisis of the self. But the Matrix itself was influenced greatly by Ghost in the Shell. The Wachowski creators of the Matrix and its sequels showed it to the producer Joel Silver, saying, "We want to do that for real." The Matrix series took several concepts from the film, including the Matrix Digital Rain, which was inspired by the opening credits of Ghost in the Shell, and I talk about that in my original breakdown. And the way characters access the Matrix through holes in the back of their necks. There's so much that they take from Ghost in the Shell. It's insane. But the Wachowskis also pull from a lot of Eastern and Western cinema at the same time, and we're going to see that as we break down some of these scenes. Other parallels have been drawn to James Cameron's Avatar, Steven Spielberg's AI, or artificial intelligence, and also the movie Surrogate. James Cameron cited Ghost in the Shell as a source of inspiration, citing it as an influence on the Avatar movie. So I feel that it's very important to watch Ghost in the Shell. Like, if you want to understand a lot of these films, you actually have to go through where these films came from and these ideas and see what inspired the directors, the screenwriters, and things like that. You can't know it all, but definitely the ones that stick out, the ones that are very powerful, that have inspired, obviously, many movies that we feel are very powerful and very telling to what we're living in right now, or very telling to ourselves and what we need to understand. We need to understand these things and bring that to the surface when we're studying cinema. So the movie opens up with the Warner Brothers picture logo, and it's in that green tone, right? And it has the clouds behind it. And this is already subliminally associating that us as the viewers are being logged into the Matrix. The movie itself is kind of a representation of the Matrix itself. Every time we see this green tone, it represents the Matrix system. And us being introduced to this at the beginning is giving us the notion that we are logging into the Matrix itself. And also, it's foreshadowing the later scenes where we actually get to see reality, which is the dark clouds in the background. We start out with Trinity and Cypher having a discussion about Neo and a tracing program running on the screen where we see the numbers 555, which represents the Hiram Habif legend and the third degree of Freemasonry, and I will explain that later on. But then it zooms into the number 0. And this number 0 is a womb, it's a tunnel, it's a gateway into something, right? It's a transitional thing where we're going from one place into another, also representing that journey of initiation. Now, this conversation between Trinity and Cypher actually foreshadows Cypher's eventual demise and betrayal of the team. Something to make note of right here is that the movie starts at the heart of the city hotel, and the movie actually ends here later on as well. So it's an Ouroboros, it's a complete cycle, but it's also the heart, the center of the city. It's about true care. So symbolically, this is associated with the Anahata chakra. So we're going to talk about that once we get to the end of the first film. As we see, Trinity is being hunted down by the agents of the states, aka Order followers, the scum of the earth. As we can see, Trinity is located in the symbolic room of 303, which in computer jargon is an HP error code, usually the result of a bad sector or sectors within the hard drive. The server is trying to redirect the user agent to a different resource as indicated by the URI in the location header field, which is intended to provide an indirect response to the original request. So right off the bat, we can see that there's going to be a lot of esoteric knowledge hidden within the computer code and numerology in this movie. We can look at this as the location where Trinity is residing, room 303, is actually a bad sector of the system, which makes sense considering Trinity happens to be an individual who is awakened. And also the room 303 has symbolic significance to higher state of consciousness. So the system considers anybody who is unplugged from the Matrix to be a bad sector if they are residing in that sector. They're also looked at as viruses, which is why you have these antiviral agents of the system that come after Trinity, the agents of the state. The number 33 also has a lot of esoteric symbolism within it. 33 is the temperature that ice melts at, and it is the age that Jesus died. We have the 33 degrees in Freemasonry, which is an honorary award bestowed upon the Scottish Rite Freemason. They say that the age of enlightenment is between the age of 28 and 33. So this has direct tie-ins with the level of consciousness that Trinity has. Later in the film, we find out that this is the place where Neo, who represents the archetypal Jesus, dies and is resurrected, just like Jesus died at the age 33, correlating to the Abrahamic tradition of Christianity. At the beginning of each film, Trinity is in some sort of distress, and this represents the sacred feminine principle in distress, or the sacred feminine principle in our own world and minds being under a barrage of attacks from the dark occult. And these agents of the state obviously represent the people who are doing the bidding of the dark occult and the control system. So right off the bat, we can see a lot of Abrahamic traditions being brought to the forefront. And look no farther than the name Trinity itself, which is a Christian doctrine that holds that God is one and exists in the form of three persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The three persons are distinct yet are one: substance, essence, or nature. In this context, the nature is what one is, whereas a person is who one is. The main protagonist is Thomas Anderson, played by Keanu Reeves, and he represents the everyday man, you or I, but more specifically, an individual who is thirsting after the truth about what the Matrix actually is, what the control system actually is. So it's not necessarily the everyday individual, because most individuals don't give a damn about what the truth is. But in this symbolic reference, he does represent the asleep masses, the people who are still asleep. And this is why we find him asleep in each of the films, the beginnings of each of the films. We see that, Thomas Anderson, or Neo, is still asleep at the beginning of each film. The name Neo is a Latin prefix meaning new, and also Neo is an anagram for the word one. So he is the new man, the next stage of human evolution that's pushing evolution further, right? He is an enlightened one, or will be an enlightened one, and an illuminated one. But it's also a reference to the neocortex, the area of our brain where the higher level thinking takes place, which separates us from most of the animal kingdom. So Neo also is a Jesus archetype, and in Freemasonry, he represents Hiram Abiff, the Master Mason. The Matrix trilogies are filled with parallels in the principle of duality. And this is something I would highly recommend an individual who is trying to study film to really correlate, because you really need to have a keen eye to start picking out the parallels within the scenes. So for example, here you have Neo asleep at his desk, right? And it's showing an average everyday, type of desk for most people. It's cluttered. I mean, he is a hacker, so there's probably things there that most people wouldn't have, but he is at home and it looks like someone is actually living there. Whereas in contrast to that, we see him later on at the company he works for called Metacortex, staring at a black screen, waiting for something to happen, waiting for a message from Morpheus. But what we really see here is the contrast between the two types of lifestyles. The one where he's Neo, the hacker, and then the other one where he's Thomas Anderson, living his 9-to-5 job under the supervision of authority figures, etc. The room that Neo resides in, not Thomas Anderson at Metacortex, but Neo, is 101, and this is a reference to George Orwell's 1984. Room 101 has always contained a person's greatest fears, the one thing that is absolutely unbearable for them to endure. So it's very interesting that he resides in this room. In the book 1984, O'Brien states, "You asked me once what was in room 101. I told you that you knew the answer already. Everyone knows it. The thing that is in room 101 is the worst thing in the world." And that's from part 3, chapter 5 in 1984. Neo receives the knock at the door after he was abruptly awakened from the computer hack that he just received from Trinity, saying, "Wake up, Neo," and it tells him to follow the white rabbit. And a text appears that says, "Knock, knock." But what is significant here is that he's listening to the song Mass Attack, laying out more predictive programming that connects to the 9/11 and 3/11 mass terrorist attacks. Now this is multi-layered because the text implies that the hacker or Morpheus knows preemptively about certain events that are going to play out, which makes sense considering that he's painted as a terrorist in this movie. But it also has a metaphysical concept tied into determinism, which is a huge part of the Matrix's theology, because it dabbles between the dialectic of free will and predeterminism throughout the series. Neo is greeted by two interesting characters, especially with their names. The male is Choi and the female is Du jour. And when you combine these two names together, you get Choi du jour. And this is French. It means choice of the day, dabbling more in that dichotomy of determinism versus free will, because he has the choice to follow the white rabbit, but yet it seems that there are things that are predetermined. He says to Neo, "You're my savior, man, my own personal Jesus Christ." And this line is alluding to Neo's ultimate destiny as the one, but also it obviously is referencing a lot more Abrahamic, Christianity. They've come there to get some stolen software from Neo, being that he's a hacker. And Neo stores his stolen software in the book that actually influenced this movie a great deal, Simulacra and Simulation. The book is by John Baudrillard. It's interesting because there's a lot of symbolism to this, not only with the idea of the book being hollowed out, but also with the combination and correlation to the fake fiat currency that is in his hands. The book seeks to examine, or I should say the author seeks to examine the relationship between reality, symbols, and society, in particular the significance and symbolism of culture and media involved in the constructing and understanding of shared existence. Simulacra refers to depicted things that either have no original or no longer do they have an original. So for example, think of the process of cloning, especially in botany. You have a mother plant that normally you would continuously get your strong genes from, so that you do not lose the integrity of the genes that are being passed down. If you continuously clone from a clone, on the other hand, you're going to actually break down the integrity of the genome code, and then eventually the strengths in the genes start to break down and you start to lose the potency that the mother plant originally had. So this reminds me of the Theseus idea that comes out of the Greek tradition, where they propose the idea of, is there an eternal essence that remains even if you exchange all the parts of the form of that thing? So let's say you have a boat and you start to replace each board of that boat, and eventually the whole boat is replaced. Is there an essence of its original form that remains even though that you replaced all the materialistic ideas? So this questions the idea of whether you have a soul or an essence and things like that. So the idea that these machines are constantly breeding the human race over and over and over seems to be that, if you continue to build this type of system, is there an essence that remains of humanity within them? And obviously in the movie we see that it's a yes. There is an eternal essence or spirit that remains within human beings, even if they are constantly replaced or become copies, even though the original is lost. Though we can't necessarily assume that they do not have an original human being, such as a pure-blooded Zion, to make copies from, or some form of blueprint. But it is an interesting concept nonetheless. Simulation often refers to the imitation of the operations of the real world. And it's interesting because a lot of people, especially in the quantum theory groups, tend to think that our world is a simulation. And usually when people bring that up, I always ask them, what is it imitating? What is it simulating, right? And you never really get a conclusive answer from that. They just want to say that all of reality is an illusion, which I feel is a major God complex or solipsistic issue within the individual's psyche. Also playing into forms of escapism, where you never actually have to deal with what is taking place in this realm or at this level of existence. See, the Matrix here is actually imitating a specific time period of our real world. So my answer to that is yes, it is possible that all of what we consider to be reality at this level of existence is an illusion, and that's kind of proven through some quantum theories and quantum sciences. The experience is definitely real. And then also my answer to what is it simulating? Well, it's simulating consciousness. It's simulating the holistic mind. And this is a good place to bring up the 7 Hermetic principles. You'll find that in this movie, the 7 Hermetic principles are well laid out. That, You know, like the first principle is mentalism, that all is mind. And we see that throughout the movie, that all is mind, especially in the Matrix and then out of the Matrix as well. But I definitely caution people with this first principle. And the reason why is because a lot of people misinterpret it. And they interpret it to be a solipsistic type of mentality, where everything is just generated by the individual and you are alone by yourself. So I do have to question whether that this is some form of dark programming trying to influence people into a solipsistic mindset. But going back to the symbolism of the book and money, so it's interesting because we have a fake thing, money, being exchanged for another artificial item, being a software that's going to be used for whatever probably criminal activity this person is trying to perform. Or maybe it's a more pleasurable activity or something personal. But, you know, money is a proxy for the true spiritual currency, which is time and attention. So I find that interesting that you have this parallel between these forms of proxies. We also have the correlation between having a book which has very high value, and then you have software put inside of the book. And this is kind of that transition from the ancient past of how we would gather and store information, preserve information, from where we're going now with how we store digital information, obviously. So I find that very intriguing when it comes to how the scene plays out here, that you have a hollowed out book, meaning people don't read anymore. You know, maybe Neo has read this book at one time. It could have been something that influenced him into trying to search for the Matrix, because he feels that everything around him, he's questioning his own reality, and everything around him looks to be a simulation. This reminds me of the debate between Socrates and Aristotle about the nature of artificialness versus reality. At some level, everything that's artificial is created from reality. So can we actually truly say that it doesn't have a basis in realness at some level? It is something that we all must ask ourselves. What is truly artificial? And honestly, we shouldn't even be using the word real here, because what it is it's a dialectic between artificialness and nature itself. Because it's not that people argue whether artificialness is real, but it's whether people argue whether it is natural. So I find it interesting that since we are natural beings here, that anything that we create is considered to be unnatural. Well, we could extend this to the animal kingdom then, like a beaver dam or a bird's nest. Both of those things can be seen as unnatural things. Those are made by beings that are of nature, but the nest and the dam itself was not created by nature. But at some level it kind of was, because the components of it, being the being, is of nature, and the material that's used is of nature. So in this way, we can say that everything that we create is truly artificial, besides our own children. Those would be the only natural things that we can create, because it's a natural function of our biological nature, right? But in extension, the bird nest and the beaver dam are a form of nature. Not directly created by nature, but it is created through nature. Questions like this have baffled minds throughout the centuries. It seems to be very simple, but as you dig deeper and deeper into it, you find out that it becomes quite ambiguous. The issues with this is that it plays into our own idea of how we define what is an illusion as well. So this is why Plato and Aristotle got into this debate, because artificialness can relate synonymously with an illusion as well. This also ends up tying in with things of the realm of mental illnesses, right? So schizophrenia, multiple personality disorders, how we have a criteria for these things. So yeah, when it pertains to the Matrix, as in this movie, then we do need to set a criteria for what is an illusion, what is artificial, and what is actually real or natural. I'm not here to give you the answer to that. I'm just here to stimulate the thoughts about the interesting concept and the definitions of these terms and ideas. One more interesting thing is we have this concept called gaslighting, right? And in some ways, people could say that Morpheus and Trinity were gaslighting Neo, though we have to discern true gaslighting from somebody actually trying to pull you out of a delusional mental illness or an attachment to something that is an illusion rather than you actually being in the real. So I've heard this argument from many people before that, you trying to wake them up to the reality that they are currently co-experiencing with all of us here is a form of gaslighting. But it's not, because it's not based in an ulterior agenda to, fuel your own ego or to get something besides your own betterment, besides your own health, besides your own self-awareness and self-empowerment and self-actualization. So we have to be very cautious with gaslighting as well. And this definitely correlates back to the Matrix itself. Thomas Anderson is a copy of his true body. It's a residual image, which we hear later on in the movie. So is there not some form of that that's actually real, such as his mind at some level? Is that not real? So we do have these questions that pop up in this, and this is what this scene is kind of alluding to. I would like to say that just because something is artificial doesn't mean that it doesn't have a place in our conscious experience here as spiritual beings. I think that the things that are artificial that prevent us from forward growth or conscious evolution into a higher type or a higher place in our existence or a more moral existence are things that should be done away with. So artificiality without any kind of ethical backing is very, very dangerous. My assertion here is that how do you define what is artificial? The ambiguous nature of the definition of what is artificial and what is not has to be explored more deeply. Going back to the book, it is about people who are misled into a sort of dream world, into an illusion, and that we've confused the representation of something for the actual real thing. Now this goes back to what I just said about Neo, Imagine thinking that that's actually really Neo and believing in that, being fully fixed on that is absolutely reality, when in fact it's actually not the true reality of his situation or of himself or who he is. So we're confusing the constructions of man, the culture of man, for nature itself, for the individuality. We've confused culture with the ideas of individuality, and we've inverted these principles. Another crucial part about this scene is that the chapter which he opens the book to is the chapter on nihilism. And I feel that this chapter has a lot of relevance to this film. It reads, "These two forms no longer concern us except in part, or not at all. The nihilism of transparency is no longer either aesthetic or political, no longer borrows from either the extermination of appearance, nor from extinguishing the embers of meaning, nor from the last nuisance of an apocalypse. There is no longer an apocalypse. Only aleatory terrorism still tries to reflect it, but it is certainly no longer political, and it only has one mode of manifestation left that is at the same time of a mode of disappearance, the media. Now the media are no longer the stage where something is played. They are a strip, a track, a performative map, which we are no longer even spectators, receivers. The apocalypse is finished. Today it is the procession of the neutral, of forms of the neutral and the indifference. I will leave it to be considered whether there can be a romanticism, an aesthetic of the neutral therein. I don't think so. All that remains is the fascination for desert-like and indifferent forms, for the very operation of the system that annihilates us. Now fascination, in contrast to seduction, which was attached to appearance, and to dialectical reason, which was attached to meaning, is a nihilistic passion par excellence. It is the passion proper to the mode of disappearance. We are fascinated by all forms of disappearance, of all disappearances. As Morpheus says later in the film, welcome to the desert of the real. And this definitely pertains to this chapter in the book about nihilism. We could definitely call the Matrix a desolate, post-apocalyptic nihilism where machines have taken over and enslaved human beings as an energy source. Modern civilization has rejected meaning and objectivity as a result of bad axioms and bad philosophy, manifesting in a sort of Nietzschean power struggle of political agendas. Chronic imbalance into materialism, rather than a balance between material and spiritual, always results in a form of nihilism, a pointless, meaningless existence rooted in a solipsistic mindset. Baudrillard continues to explain his ideas about tyranny and how the only way that it can sustain itself is through terrorism. And this is the direct result of a nihilistic society. And this is exactly what Neo has found himself in, a sort of socialist, communist, anti-establishment situation, where his goal is to revolt against the elite overlords, just like what we're trying to do today. This also connects with why Morpheus is linked to being a hacker terrorist in the media. One can even say that the crew of Morpheus and all of the Red Pills actually are involved in a secret society, which battles other secret societies for the liberties of man. He was given the message to follow the White Rabbit, and then we see the White Rabbit pop up on the shoulder of Du Jour. This is a direct reference to the book Alice in Wonderland, and Neo represents Alice in this allegory. And we see a lot of Through the Looking Glass and Alice in Wonderland symbolism in the cinematography and in the cinema expression of this film. We're starting to see the synchronicities in his own life, being that he just got the message about the White Rabbit, and then this girl shows up and there's a white rabbit on her shoulder, and we need to actually follow these messages when the universe provides them for us. It will lead us to the truth. And obviously this movie is a big rebranding or re-imaging of Plato's allegory of the cave, so it will lead us out of the cave and into the light. He meets up with Trinity at the club he ends up at, and she tells him that it is the question that's driving him mad. And what is the question, she asks him, and he says, what is the Matrix? So now we see why this movie is all about what the Matrix is, finding out and discovering what the artificial reality actually is. We have to understand that the resolve and the persistence combined with the desire to look for the truth will get us those answers. If we're not persistent in our endeavor to look for the truth, then we will not find the truth. Thomas Anderson works for a software company called Meta Cortex, and this is pretty interesting because meta means beyond, and then cortex obviously refers to the brain anatomy. So I feel that this has significance of being beyond the anatomy of, the brain, or maybe even a way of looking at it like a form of authority over the brain, like we are in control over the cortex. And this is interesting with the scene that comes up here, because he's in trouble for being late, and the boss says, you have a problem with authority, and if the employee has a problem, the company has a problem, which implies a sense of collectivism rather than the individual rights and liberties, and it kind of puts you in this Borg mentality. It's the fallacious ideology of the greater good supersedes the minority, and the only true minority is the individual. That is the real minority of the world. So it gives us an idea about, Thomas Anderson's ideas about authority. Obviously, he has some sense of rebellion against authority, and authority is the most dangerous superstition that mankind has ever created. It's not legitimate. It's an erroneous dogma that has led to man's downfall and the downfall of civilization and humanity all around, all throughout history. It is the main issue that we are all facing, is false dogmatic authority that is in control over the individual and the individual's liberties. Pretty much the way I look at the word authority in this context is that it's simply a euphemism for slavery. The only real authority in the universe is the truth. Shortly after this, we see Thomas Anderson sitting at his desk, and he receives a cell phone, and he receives a phone call from Morpheus. Now, Morpheus is the truth speaker. He's the one who brings the truth to the red pills, or the people who are rebelling against the system at some level, the people who are questioning the entire construct. So he gets the call to freedom. This is the clarion call, where he's called to a higher service, to truth and to freedom. And he has to answer that call and then, follow that path to find the truth and to find true freedom and to eventually help free humanity. Morpheus goes on to state that he's not sure if Neo is ready to understand the truth, and this is kind of implying that most people are not ready in the world to be awakened, and this is kind of true, but like he says here, we are out of time, and that's where we're at now. We have been here for a long time. I'd say the past 20 years we've been out of time. I think we've passed that threshold where need to tiptoe around people being ready for the truth. I think we need to drag people kicking and screaming to the truth at this point because of what's going on in our world. Neo ends up not following the path or following the word and the advice of Morpheus, and then he's escorted out by the agents of the state, which he finds himself in a room. And in this scene we see this we see the camera zoom in, and when it's zooming in we see all these television screens. Now this will come up in the second film, and I will elaborate more on those television screens in the second film when he meets the architect. But what we find is that Neo is trying to express his right of freedom of speech. He asks for a phone call, and then he's denied that by the agents of the states, and then they go as far to actually censor him by melting his lips together and sealing his lips so that he cannot speak. Now this is what's going on across social media networks, across all the media platforms such as YouTube, Odyssey. There's all kinds of censorship all across the board right now, and this is what this is in reference to. They don't want you to be able to talk about these ideas, especially things that relate to the occult or things that relate to true liberty and freedom for the individual, things that challenge the dogma, things that challenge the false religious ideologies that are ruling the world and plaguing the minds of men. So this is in direct reference to digital censorship. Now we also find some predictive programming here with the files that Agent Smith lays on the table. We find the date September 11th, 2001, which is obviously predictive programming or foreshadowing of the events of September 11th, 2001, which was a blatantly obvious dark Masonic sacrifice ritual. And remember that this date is the expiration date of his ID. The Twin Towers represent the two towers of Freemasonry, which they collapse, which literally relates to the two towers of consciousness, the sacred masculine, sacred feminine principle being collapsed. Obviously there's a lot more to that, but that's how I sum it up. A little bit more predictive programming can be combined with Neo's birthday, which is 3/11. This is the date of the 2004 Madrid bombing. To add more credence to this, we find another page in these records that show 3/11, the date of the Madrid bombing, in combination with 9/11. So this is no coincidence. And as we know, a lot of these events have been pre-planned and documented far before we ever see them play out in the real world. Then the agents go as far to actually bug Neo and put this little mini sentinel, if you want to call it that, which are like these bigger robots that you see later on in the real world, inside of Neo's gut. And then Trinity has to extract that bug because he has a higher potential to become an agent, or actually to jeopardize the entire meet up and to jeopardize the higher self and the truth teller, which would be, Morpheus, and also to jeopardize the entire concept of Zion and the entire integrity of Zion. But one could definitely look at this as a metaphor for the surveillance state. Right before Trinity extracts the bug from Neo's stomach, Neo is actually standing under the Adam Street Bridge. Now, this is very significant because it plays into the Christian metaphor and allegory that's going on in this film. But also, if we take a look at the rain that's pouring down off of the bridge, it looks like the code from the Matrix. We also see this in the car when the rain is drizzling down over top of the windows. We can actually see the water droplets that look like the code raining down. I also feel like this is sort of a bridging point from the artificial reality into the new the actual reality, right? Because this is that turning point where he actually gets to meet up with these red pill, the real people, the rebels, and he's actually taking that next step, right? He's crossing that bridge into the real world. There's also a point in this scene where Trinity tells him that he knows where this path goes if he decides to not go with them, and she opens the door, or the door's already open, and it's a dark, lonely street, and she implies that he's been down this very depressive road before, this road that leads to just more suffering, more sorrow, more self-inflicted issues that obviously he's been going through for a long time. So I feel like this is the road back into slavery. This is the road of ignorance is bliss as well. The idea that might as well just go live my life and not actually step out of the comfort of my own illusions. Next, we have Trinity escorting Neo through the Temple of Morpheus, is what I like to refer to it as. This building is used later on when Morpheus is captured by the agents, but the most significant part of this building, there's two very specific symbolic references to Freemasonry in this building. The checkerboard floor, which is also known as the mosaic pavement in Freemasonry. And mosaic pavement does have to do with Moses. But let's just focus on the basics here. The black and white checkerboard floor is obviously seen throughout Freemasonry. It is a very, very powerful symbol, and it represents duality. It represents the dual nature of one's consciousness. It also represents the inability to distinguish right from wrong. So when you're on the floor of the house, or if you are squared, kind of like that old saying, don't be square, it means that you do not truly know the difference between right and wrong. You're still in ignorance. You're still living through illusion. But in this symbolism, in this scene, the symbolism is direct reference to the second degree of Freemasonry. And it is about climbing the spiral staircase. And the spiral staircase represents a path that you cannot see the destination of. So I have a depiction of the second degree board on the screen, and you're trying to get to that second level and to walk down that hallway and to enter into each of the doorways to see what is stored within our own minds and within the temple of ourselves. And I will be explaining that in part 2 more thoroughly, because that's what we're going to really talk a lot about, is the second degree of Freemasonry. But you can see the symbolism being brought through with the cinematography and the set pieces of the spiral staircase and the checkered board floor, obviously a direct match to the second degree of Freemasonry. In proper context, this is about the first degree of Freemasonry and Neo's initiation into the secret society. Morpheus is derived from Greek mythology, and his name actually means form or shape. In Greek mythology, Morpheus shaped and formed the dreams through which he could appear to mortals in any form. This talent made Morpheus a messenger of the gods, able to communicate divine messages to sleeping mortals. We can confirm this also through the dialogue that he has with Neo. He states, "Have you ever had a dream, Neo, that you were so sure was real? What if you were unable to wake from that dream, Neo? how would you know the difference between the dream world and the real world? We can also see how this plays out, that he is the messenger of truth from the gods, right? So we can look at this as Neo is the chosen one, and Morpheus is there to give the divine message of truth to him so that he can find his way so that they can save humanity. And in that way, he could be correspondent to Hermes. So if we take a look at the next slide, you can see the kind of trinity that I've laid out here between the aspects of consciousness. We have Morpheus, which represents mind, or thoughts, the intellectual capability, or knowledge, and the aspects of truth that is being revealed in the movie. And then we have Trinity, which represents the spirit, who also represents the emotions, the intuition, compassion, and love. And then we have Neo in the middle, which represents the will, the willpower. And he also represents courage, conscience, action, and freedom. These three characters directly relate and correspond to the three pillars of the first degree of Freemasonry. So the left Freemasonic pillar is known as the Doric pillar, and it represents the sacred masculine energy. Biologically, it is corresponded to our left hemisphere and the aspects of our left hemisphere, being that of analytical thought or logic, which can also be correlated to the solar aspects of our consciousness. The right pillar is corresponded to the sacred feminine aspects of consciousness and energies of the universe. This pillar is known as the Corinthian pillar, and biologically it corresponds back to the right hemisphere of our brain. So it corresponds to the sacred feminine aspects of our biology and thought processes, being that of creativity, emotions, passivity. It corresponds to spiritualness rather than matter, which would be more of a left brain solar aspect. And then we also have it being corresponded to the lunar energy. The middle pillar is called a Tuscan pillar, or also the Ionic pillar, like I referred to it at the beginning. And this represents Neo, which only comes into activation fully when the left and right hemispheres are fully balanced with each other. We could dive deeper into the biological correspondences, such as Morpheus being correlated to the hippocampus, or Trinity being correlated to the pituitary, and Neo being correlated to the pineal gland. Neo could also be correlated to the corpus callosum, which is the bridging point between the two hemispheres. There's an immense amount of study that you could do into these types of correlations. I'm not going to spend much time here. I just wanted to give you a little bit of basic overviews of how I look and interpret these characters corresponding to our biology and also our energetic essences of consciousness. Now we come to one of the most famous scenes in The Matrix, where Neo is being initiated into the higher degrees of the mysteries. And he's in the temple. This is the Masonic temple, and he's sitting across from Morpheus in the red chairs. In this scene, Morpheus makes a profound statement. He says, "The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your very eyes to blind you from the truth." Neo responds, "What truth?" Morpheus states, "That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, into a prison that you cannot taste or see or touch, a prison for your mind." Truthfully, this is the answer to what the Matrix is. And we wouldn't need anything else except for the fact that Neo does not have direct gnosis of what the Matrix is. He has never truly experienced it. This is just information being relayed from one person to another. But to have direct gnosis of that thing makes it so much more realistic, because it is you coming into harmony with the real. So this probably is one of the most famous scenes. This is the dialectical choice between the blue pill and the red pill. A lot of people have contention with this choice that's offered to him, saying that it's actually an illusion of choice, that either way that he chooses, he ends up in the same place. And I happen to disagree with that statement. I understand why people say that, because we find out later on in the trilogy, like we're going to talk about, that, Morpheus is actually kind of being manipulated by the program known as the Oracle. But I don't want to spoil any of that right now. But this isn't actually about that exoteric knowledge. Esoterically, we're talking about the aspects of consciousness and the frequencies of those aspects of consciousness. So the blue frequency represents staying passive, staying submissive, staying in conformity, and staying right where you're at, staying in depression, staying in the unknown. Whereas the red frequency represents you taking an action to actualize yourself and to become authentic and to follow the truth. So the red frequency represents the action frequency. So that's how I look at these, and I don't look at this as an illusion of choice. I think it is an authentic choice that all of us have to make. In the slide, I provided you a very interesting image where it shows the reflection of Neo. This is more mirror symbolism that's put into this movie. There's lots of mirror symbolism throughout this movie, and I'll point out a couple of them. But if you keep your eyes open, you're going to see mirror symbolism all over the place. So we have Neo in the right lens of Morpheus's sunglasses. And you can't see his hand in this one. It's very important to understand that you cannot see his hand, which is representing non-action, and that's the hand that's giving out the blue pill, which also correlates to the right brain frequencies. And then in the left lens of these sunglasses, you can actually see the hand, which correlates to him actually taking action to choose the red pill and then to activate himself. So we have to realize that he's already in the right brain. He's in a chronic right brain imbalance. So to balance that, he has to have the red frequency. He has to activate the sacred masculine principle by becoming, actualized and becoming more in tune with his processes of the sacred masculine principles and the left brain aspects of our biology and consciousness. If he were to choose the blue pill, he would go into a chronic imbalance, probably putting himself into a place of complete self-loathing and apathy and hedonism. After this, Neo is taken into the back room where he meets the rest of the team. He sees Trinity, Cypher, and a few other members. And then he's sat into a chair where he actually goes through kind of a metamorphosis, a hallucinogenic experience. And this could be relating back to an entheogenic trip or journey, where one actually becomes awakened through taking something like LSD or some type of psilocybin such as mushrooms. And I do think that that's also what the pill could represent in a certain aspect. It could be a tab of LSD, honestly, if you look at it that way. Now, I am a proponent of psychedelics in proper and conscious use of them, but we do have to realize that, it was created from a CIA agenda, along with the Timothy Leary and the counterculture movement of the 60s and 70s, kind of playing into this idea of false revolution again. I find it intriguing that in the movie Total Recall, the control agencies of the state are trying to force Arnold to actually take the red pill to go back into his delusions. But in this movie, it's actually vice versa. You take the red pill to get out of the illusion, right? So the idea here is reversed, and it also makes me wonder and curious about the intentions of the red pill. But obviously, when correlated to psychedelics, it could be correlated to natural psychedelics, but it's most likely LSD, right? And we do have to wonder whether that's intentionally trying to push forward this agenda of a false revolution, of a revolution back into the system, right? We do have to recognize that psychedelic awakenings do happen, especially when we're looking at Eastern shamanic cultures. So yes, I think psychedelics are very important and very useful, and I've done quite a bit myself, but I do also think that there is an agenda behind a lot of them, so we have to be very prudent. And it's interesting because the word psychedelic actually means to clear the mind. Psyche means mind, and then delune is where we get delic from, and it actually means to clear, to make clear. Neo turns and looks at the broken mirror when he's sitting in this chair. Again, more mirror symbolism, mirroring his self. This is all about him coming into true knowledge about his self. Anytime you see him looking into a mirror or his reflection, such as in the reflection of Morpheus's sunglasses or things like that. So this is about the dualistic nature of the self and the internal dualism that he's in. And also the mirror that's broken symbolizes that his mind is fractured. And as we see, the mirror actually solidifies itself, or you know, fixes the cracks within the mirror, and it becomes one. So this is about him becoming unified within. He's having his sacred union of the left brain and the right brain, the left sacred masculine principle and the right sacred feminine principle. This mirror is also a throwback to Alice in Wonderland through the looking glass. Neo touches the mirror, and the mirror itself becomes a liquid form and actually starts to engulf his whole body. And this is interesting because I feel this is the alchemical transmutation, and this relates to the alchemical element of quicksilver, which is the process of the great work for the self. Neo then awakens into the real world, and he is symbolically born again, coming out of this pod, kind of like the womb of his mother. And he opens his eyes and he has this very painful experience. This is an extremely painful awakening, and this is the truth. Not only seeing the reality of humanity is very painful, but the process of this is physically arduous, and physically very hard on the body, obviously. And we'll get to a little bit of that in just a second. But then he sees all the other humans that are all, you know, stored in these pods, that are all being used as energy sources in these pods. And this I relate back to the current condition of humanity. This is literally where we're at. I mean, people aren't really in pods, but in a way, a lot of people kind of are in their own pods, metaphorically, right? So the literal part of this is that everybody is enslaved, and they're enslaved by the abuse of technology and a control system set up to perpetuate the system of slavery, and this relates to our current system of government. Neo is flushed down a tube and then thrown into a body of water, and I feel like this is not only another symbolic reference to birthing, with the water breaking and the tube and everything like that. It's also symbolic of another type of baptism for his second birth. He eventually ends up on the table where they're actually trying to stimulate his muscle growth because they have atrophied. And he ends up turning to Morpheus and asking him, "Why do my eyes hurt?" And Morpheus responds, "Because you've never used them before." This correlates to that idea that he has been blinded. He doesn't know the truth. He's never actually, seen reality. He's never really used his not only his third eye, but also his physical eyes. But also, each needle reminds me of a little bit of Buddhism with what is known as the 1,000 points of light. Anybody familiar with Buddhism should know what I'm talking about. But we are light beings. And this, to me, actually symbolically references that he's turning on these specific points of light within the body. And to properly do this, he has to have help from others. This is something that's very important throughout the movie. Neo isn't just the only one. He gets help from the other, archetypal aspects of consciousness, and he gets help from the crew members. He has a lot of help in this, and we have to understand that metaphorically and allegorically, that we need to have help when we're being awakened. Yes, you can do it through a process of solitude and a process of isolation, and you can do it on your own. But also, I don't think that you shouldn't ask for help when in need, when you're in that process, because it's not an easy process, especially with all the conditioning that's going on right now and all the mind control. I look at movies in a holistic point of view, that each character represents an archetypal essence of my consciousness, or consciousness in whole, of the whole human race, or consciousness universally. And in this manner, we can actually start to pull out so much more, and how we can relate to each character, and how they're all aspects of ourselves. And we need to learn from these different aspects of ourselves so that we can recognize these things in our own world, and how to deal with them, how to resolve some of the issues, or how to manifest things that we say we want in our world. Neo and Morpheus log into the construct, which is the white room with the two red chairs and the TV sitting in the middle. It's interesting that a TV is being used as a means for relaying this information. I think that televisions can be used both positively and negatively to convey ideas, philosophies, geopolitical issues and things like that, but also they can be used for mind control, frequency mind control, color mind control, word mind control, all kinds of different forms of mind control. But it is interesting here, and it does say deep image on the TV. So I found that interesting, and it's an upside down triangle with the tube sitting in the center of that triangle, representing the sacred feminine principle, or it also could represent an inversion of a principle as well. It just depends on how you look at that. The main part of this that I want to bring to your attention is the fact that they're talking about what reality actually is, and how do you prove what is actually real. So this is something common in philosophy. This has to do with epistemology, and it has to do with how can we justify what we determine to be real through our senses. And my statement to this is that yes, it's completely true that your senses can be tricked into believing something that is not real, such as by, television or virtual reality or something like the Matrix, but also that we have to recognize that that's the only things that we really do have to go off of to prove what is real, is what is happening. So we have to have a process, a criteria for actually proving what is actually real. And this process has to be a process of deduction and sort of an apophatic process. We have to remove what is not real to come to what is real. And that's what I mean by an apophatic deduction, is by removing what it is not to get to what it is. I also think that intuition plays a big part in it, and I think that holistic consciousness plays a big part into being able to conclusively prove what reality actually is. So let's just say at the ultimate quantum level of reality, everything is an illusion. Well, what matters is the experience that we're having. And that experience, being a positive or negative one, is what we need to be focusing on, especially if it's a negative one, so that we can mend or resolve what has caused that negative experience so it doesn't continue to happen. This scene is also here to help answer the question of what the Matrix is. So Morpheus says, what is the Matrix? And then he states control. And he equates the human body to that of a Duracell battery, that the machines are using humans as a means of an energy source, because the machines actually needed solar light to actually run, and the humans scorched the skies, and eventually they had to find another means to actually keep themselves going. But what is the Matrix really? Well, it's not just control. It literally is mind control, is what it is. It is about the mental control. So yes, it is biological or physical control as well, but it is mainly about controlling the minds of people, because that's what the system is used for. It's about keeping the minds of the people in check so that the system can continue to perpetuate, so that the human race, or the rebels in the human race, won't rise up and actually start to fight back against the machines. Allegorically, this is about our overarching governmental system, about the system of control that we have. And it's interesting because the etymology of the word government literally means to control the mind. Government is derived from the Latin verb governare, or gubernare, which means to control, and the Latin noun mens mentes, which means mind. So this is a direct reference to the system of mind control that we have in our current day, in our current condition. Now, maybe the Wachowskis and the other people weren't directly referencing government, so to say, but synchronistically, this is directly corresponded to that. Though I think it's blatantly obvious that they actually are talking about the system of government. But it is quite interesting that they could come up with this amazing allegorical film about the system of slavery that we're all experiencing, but yet still somehow not meet the mark, not actually reach the level of consciousness that gives them the enlightenment, or where they have attained the state of enlightenment, where they can self-recognize inherently that all of government is corrupt. In the next scene, we see Neo plugged into the chair where you would log into the Matrix, but yet he's not actually logged into the Matrix. And we have him being uploaded with data directly to his brain so that he can learn specific combat techniques. And I feel this is a allegory for the level of knowledge, specifically knowledge and self-defense that is required to protect yourselves from the system. Unfortunately, today we have to go through the arduous task of actually doing our due diligence and actually exercising these physical attributes to perfect them in our world and to activate the physical body so that we can be prepared if needed to defend ourselves in a violent situation. But to me, this also pertains to the requirement of a depth of knowledge to actually understand how to deal with the system at hand. So we have to do our own studies. So this is in reference to doing our own due diligence into studying many aspects of not only self-defense, but the occult, esotericism, the corruption in the system, conspiracies, false flags, trauma-based mind control, all these things, all these aspects of manipulation and control that are being used and wielded against our consciousness. Because let's not euphemize anything. We literally are in a war on consciousness. In the next few scenes, we have the dojo scene, the dojo fight scene between Morpheus and Neo, where Neo wants to exercise these abilities that he's just learned. And I find it very interesting because of the cinematography in this is it's a throwback to a lot of old Western cinematography films and also Eastern. Obviously, more specifically Eastern, but the camera framing also seems to be a little bit of a Western cinematography as well being thrown in there. But we have Morpheus all in black, representing the sacred pillar of the sacred feminine. And then we have Neo all in white, representing the sacred pillar of the masculine. But this also is a difference in degree within the Matrix, because he is looked at as a white belt, whereas Morpheus is looked at as a black belt. And this is why he has the upper hand, because he is the more astute and more trained and more experienced fighter. You will see a lot in cinematography that these types of framing tend to correlate to the 2 or 3 pillars of Freemasonry. And then you'll also see this black and white duality going on in a lot of movies as well. So even though Neo has all these programs that have been downloaded into his mind, seemingly he's in better shape and he's a younger, more fit individual as a physical specimen, Morpheus still has the upper hand. And Morpheus tries to explain this to him by trying to break down the mental barriers in his mind that are preventing him from actually, achieving his potential. So the idea here is that he's trying to deconstruct the attachment to the physical body, because Neo is simply stuck in the physical plane of existence during this. He thinks, that he can beat him physically, but that's not the case, because he hasn't broken through those mental barriers that he's still attached to, ego attached to actually activate the body in the proper way so that he can manifest his true potential. And this is why we get the famous statement, "I am trying to free your mind, Neo, but I can only show you the door. You're the one who has to walk through it." Which is a direct suggestion that only the individual themselves can actually do this work. They're the one who has to open the inner gateway to self-actualization that ultimately creates the individual's transformation, or the alchemical transmutation of the lower self into the higher self. So then they log into another training program right after this, and this is where he's really trying to push Neo even further. This is the idea of taking the leap of faith. So he's trying to train Neo's mind to actually let go of all the fear and doubt and disbelief that things like this can actually be done. And he's trying to build up self-confidence, self-esteem, courage to actually, take this jump. Because Neo is still obviously attached to the pre-programmed ideas that he had from his life conditioning in the Matrix. Morpheus makes the jump with ease because he's at that level of consciousness and awareness. Neo happens to not make that jump, and he hits the trampoline-like concrete at the bottom, and he gets damaged a little bit in the physical world, which brings up the question to Neo's mind, brings out the question from Neo that, if you die in the Matrix, you die in the real world. And Morpheus responds, the body cannot live without the mind. And this is something that's very important to understand, because it gives us the idea of mentalism in the Hermetic principles, the idea that all is mind, and everything that is projected from the mind is the creative principle that manifests the effects into the physical world. So everything physical is the effects of the mind. It is the emergent properties of the mind itself, collectively as the holistic capital M mind, and then also individually, where we go out and create individual behaviors into this world. And that doesn't just apply to the Matrix, that also applies to the real world. This jump program was also foreshadowed at the beginning when Trinity and the agent in the chase scene actually make this jump during the intro of this film. So there was some foreshadowing for this scene. And then Morpheus shows him the third training program, which is all about the agents in the system and how each individual is a potential agent or enemy of the liberties of humanity. What I do find interesting in this scene is that everybody is in a single uniform, meaning they are all almost identical to each other in their business attire. So they all look almost exactly the same. They're all wearing black and white, and this symbolizes that they're all in a collective mentality, a collective groupthink ideology, and it's a virus running through that system. We also get a view of a order follower or a police officer, which is higher up on the hierarchy of the control system. They tend to be there to protect the agents of the state, and they tend to be used more often than just your average common individual for the agents of the state to capture the people who have been unplugged, the red pills, you can say. And they work out just perfectly because they're willing to abdicate their personal responsibility of discerning a right action from wrong action for a paycheck, pretty much. And they taken an oath to swear allegiance to uphold all laws of the system, whether those laws are just or unjust. And that says a lot about their moral character, their moral integrity. All these people are just blind, obedient servants of the state and of the system. Morpheus states, "The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around. What do you see? Business people, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we're trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged, and many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent upon the system, that they will fight to protect it." Were you listening to me, Neo? Or were you looking at the woman in the red dress as a woman in a red dress passes him during this conversation? This scene brings to mind another great quote by Gustave Le Bon from his book The Crowd. He says, "The masses have never thirsted after truth. They turn aside from evidence that is not to their taste, preferring to deify error if error seduces them. Whoever can supply them with illusions is easily their master. Whoever attempts to destroy their illusions is always their victim. An individual in a crowd is a grain of sand amid other grains of sand, which the wind stirs up at will." This is the unfortunate truth about our current condition, is that the mass majority of people do not want to be unplugged, and they will do anything, up to even initiating violent behaviors against you, for you trying to free their mind or awaken them to the realism and to the truth of the system. Anything that contradicts their preconceived notions about the legitimacy of the system, when the system itself is completely inherently, self-evidently not legitimate, they will fight you tooth and nail, blood and bone for them to stay in that condition. They want to stay comfortable in that condition mainly because they do not want the personal responsibility that comes along with actually awakening to that condition. So Morpheus is trying to explain to Neo that these people really do love it the way that it is. And this is something that we all, especially the light workers or the great workers of the world who are trying to awaken people to the realism of our situation and to the truth and to natural law, this is something that we all have to face, is that a lot of people do not care. They do not want to be awakened, and they want to stay comfortable in their, cognitive dissonance and in their ignorance. So he says, "Were you listening to me, Neo, or were you looking at the woman in the red dress?" Now, the woman in the red dress relates back to the occult Scarlet Witch or the Babylonian whore, or there are many different names for this archetypal, motif. And it represents base desires. This is why she's in red. It represents that low chakra energy, and it represents the passion, the carnal passions, the low lustful passions of our consciousness. Now, I'm not saying all passion is a negative thing, nor am I saying that all desires are a negative thing. It's mainly our attachment to those desires that are negative. So it also represents distraction. And then Morpheus says, "Look again," to him. And when he turns around, he sees Agent Smith pointing his Desert Eagle in his face. Now, this is literally, to me, the consequences of being distracted. This is not only a direct reference to natural law, that when we're distracted from the things that are important, this is what we get. Harm will come to us because of this, or the potential of harm will come to us because of this. He's also trying to tell them that the agents of the system can be anybody, that they could be the most beautiful woman walking down the street, or your average business person, etc. He says that this is a training program designed to teach you one thing: if you're not one of us, you're one of them. And this is the sad truth about the situation of our society, is that yes, it is. If you are not in alignment with truth and natural law, then you literally are against that. You are not only willfully being ignorant of the self-evident laws of nature and continuously condoning and advocating for a system of slavery, thus you are absolutely the enemy of truth and morality because of your actions and because of your behaviors. In this scene, we see doves flying above Neo's head, and the dove is symbolic of purity or a higher state of consciousness. It's also a reference to the Holy Trinity in the Christian tradition. So moving on. Now, the ship where the crew actually resides is known as the Nebuchadnezzar. This is Hebrew. The name is Hebrew, and it actually means to protect the eldest son, which is derived from the god's name Nabu, combined with Kaduru, the eldest son, and it means to protect, simply. So it means to protect the eldest son, and the eldest son happens to be the individual who gets the inheritance, right? So there's some symbolic references to this, and I feel that it's not specifically speaking about the age, even though it does, have context of age. I think it's more about the most enlightened. It's the protector of Neo. It's the vessel which carries the crew members to their destination and also has the defensive capabilities to fight against the machines. So Nebuchadnezzar was a warrior king, often described as the greatest military leader of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. He ruled from 605 to 562 BCE in the area around the Tigris-Euphrates basin. His leadership saw numerous military successes and the construction of a building works such as the famous Ishtar Gate. There's a lot of interesting history behind Nebuchadnezzar if you look into him, and it's interesting that the ship is actually named after this warrior king, right? Because we could look at the crew members, specifically Neo, as the warrior king, and as we see in the later movies, the ship becomes very crucial in the actual war against the machines. I think it's in the second or third films. I think it's the third film. Yeah, it's the third film. So yeah, I think that's very crucial to understand that each of these ships have a specific name, and they're magically assigned. They're magically, sealed with these names to show their attributes, to show the properties in which they carry archetypally. As we progress into the film, we find out that Cypher has betrayed the crew, and this is actually foreshadowed at the beginning of the film itself with the dialogue between Cypher and Trinity. He ends up meeting Agent Smith and the two other unholy Trinity agents, as I would put them, the three viruses of the system, or actually the three antivirus programs of the system, because in this context the viruses are actually those who have awakened in the system. So he is at a fine dining restaurant eating a steak, which is very symbolic and allegorical. We see this very common in many films where the evildoer, the elite capitalistic scumbag, or somebody who has done wrong, or a murderer, a serial killer, a sociopath, they end up eating a steak. And this is symbolic of that, not only the carnistic desires from the lower base consciousness, but also symbolic of their bloodlust, their betrayal, their unworthiness of the true companionship and solidarity that they once had or supposedly had. But it's also symbolic of higher up classes as well, because the steak is looked upon symbolically as a food, a substance that is higher class to eat. It's a delicacy in a way, right? So we see this in a lot of films, but also it shows that Cypher has regressed in his consciousness, going from eating a synthetic protein substance, which who knows what that was actually made from, but it does seem to be more vegetarian or vegan like, to an actual carnistic lust for meat. The weird thing about this is that we see that it actually takes like two people to log somebody in or jack them into the Matrix. So it's kind of strange, like, how did Cypher actually get logged in without anybody else noticing that? Did he set it up some way that he could insert the plug into the back of his neck himself. It seems very awkward and very unlikely. I guess it could be done. That is a possibility. But I think what's more likely is that he had help from another crew member, and I'm going to get to that in the next slide. This is why I named the presentation Deciphering the Matrix, because it's about removing the cipher. It's about removing dishonesty and untrust and betrayal and the lower base desires, right? It's also about decrypting or, unveiling the hidden meaning within the movie itself, right? So it's kind of interesting that, Cypher, his name is Cypher, which means that he's coded. He's a cipher. He's a mystery that you have to, decode or decipher, right? So there's some green language to that. There's some allegorical importance to his name as well. Ideologically, we find out that Cypher wants to live in the illusion. He would rather live through his ego illusions by being plugged back into the Matrix than actually face the reality of the situation. And one thing I always asked is why? What drove him to this place of consciousness? And the more research I did, the more I found out that there actually was some things that led him down this path. One thing is that Morpheus had already went through, I think, 4 or 5 other people that he thought was the one, and they all ended up dead. And there's actually, a reference to this in the screenplay. There's actually some reference in the screenplay to this idea that Morpheus had led, 4 or 5 other people that he thought was the one to their deaths by awakening them. And this also gives more power and potency to the idea of pulling out somebody who's not ready, who's already been attached to the system for so long. Usually you wouldn't pull out anybody who was attached to the system for many, many years. You would want to get them while they're young so that their brains are malleable, right? Or they can really activate that neuroplasticity so that they can, re-govern their own brain, so that they can reprogram their own brain. Cypher himself is a hedonist. He's an egotist. And he also is betrayed in his own mind. It's not a real betrayal, but in his own mind he feels betrayed from Trinity because she ends up falling in love with Neo. And he knows this, and this is, alluded to at the beginning of the film as well with their conversation. So Cypher, not only he feels lack of faith in Morpheus because Morpheus has led 4 or 5 other people to their deaths thinking that they were the one, but he also has lack of faith in finding love, finding companionship, because Trinity has rejected him. So the reason why I bring this up is because we have to understand, what would drive somebody that was already awakened, that seemingly has, a pretty decent level of awareness, back into the illusions. And this relates to how we deal with other people who have awakened. I know I've seen this quite a bit in my own life, where I see people who actually start to come online. They even, get to the level of understanding natural law to a certain extent, though I wouldn't say that they understand it, but they know of natural law. And then the next thing you know, they revert back into their conformist mentality. And I do believe it has a lot to do with being comfortable. I believe it has a lot to do with the ego run amok, and I believe it has a lot to do with the absolute lower frequencies of the body and old programs and old habits taking over the individual's body. And I also believe that people just like to be in a state of ignorance or bliss, where absolutely ignorance at some level can make you blissful, but that's because you're not paying attention to what's actually going on. So there's a little puns in bliss here, which is be less or be less, right? So when you are ignorant and you're in bliss because of ignorance, you are being less than what you should be. We must find out the reason why, or the causality for these types of symptoms for a person who becomes awakened and then decides to go back to sleep. I think a lot of it also has to do with deep-seated trauma that has not been dealt with. So I think a person like this is actually in immense pain and suffering in the internal realm. And we must be very empathetic and try to reach them to the best of our abilities, and also pay attention to the signals and symptoms of these people so that we can preemptively know, the potential for them to betray us or for them to betray the truth. This is also a great allegory of what's going on in today, where we're living in a complete proxy world, and more so are we stepping into the world of artifice, where the natural world is becoming, in a way, in our own minds, obsolete. I think that the conversation between Agent Smith and Cypher here is very important, because we understand that he, wants to believe in the artificialness so much that he's willing to actually kill other people to do that. He's willing to kill his own friends or family. I would consider them to be a family, to actually get back into that. And that's how powerful these desires are. That's how powerful the attraction of being comfortable can be. This actually can tie back into everybody in the Matrix is kind of your enemy. Well, also some people that are out of the Matrix can be your enemy as well, so don't forget that. Just because you've awakened to the idea that government is corrupt doesn't mean that you're enlightened. It doesn't mean you actually are enlightened. It just means that at some level you've gained some awareness, but it doesn't mean that you truly understand yourself. It doesn't mean you've done your shadow work. There's a lot more things that play into what true enlightenment is. Just because government is slavery or that it's corrupt doesn't mean that you are an enlightened being and that you've actually raised your consciousness to a high degree. And this is a perfect example of that. So going back to the idea that he wasn't working alone, I believe that Mouse actually was the person who was helping him out during this situation, and it's kind of hinted at in the film. He actually is a hedonist as well. He's the one who created the girl in the red dress, which, implies that he has these carnal desires in himself, and he has this discussion with Neo at the dinner table, where he's talking about, not repressing these parts of ourselves. Well, yeah, I don't think that we should. I think having desires is fine. It's only when you become completely ego identified or egoly attached to those desires that they become very harmful. And I believe that Mouse is actually the one that helped him log in and actually meet up with the agents. Mouse is paralleling the ideas of hedonism with Cypher. So the idea that Cypher knows that the steak is actually not really tastes like a steak, it's not really a steak, it's just these artificial sensations that he's getting. That's, convincing him that it's actually a steak, but he loves it. He actually wants that. Well, it's the same thing with the ideology of Mouse, with knowing that this girl is not actually a real girl. It's an artificial image, and he's getting the stimulation that he feels he needs. And I think to a certain extent you can have some therapeutic uses for things like this, but obviously these people are in such a critical point of a war that they actually cannot be playing around or dilly-dallying around with things like this. They need to focus, they need to focus heavily. Does that mean that you don't have some form of entertainment or things like that in your life, or some form of artificialness? No, not at all. It just, like I said, it just means that it can be abused, and I think that both of these characters show that very, very directly, especially Cypher. Another thing to keep in mind here, why I think Mouse is actually part of Cypher's plan to relog back in, is because of the shape of their glasses. If you actually look at everybody's glasses, and the glasses represent the people who are not part of the system, but there's two different shapes of the glasses. One is more squared, which is like the agent's glasses, and we see that Cypher and Mouse have these kind of square shaped glasses, whereas the rounder glasses actually are the people who are awake, the crew. Neo has round glasses, Morpheus has round glasses, and I think this represents that aspect of care, because the circle or curvature represents that feminine aspect, whereas the squareness represents that mechanical or imbalance of the chronic masculine aspect. That doesn't mean the masculine is evil. It just means that they're in a chronic imbalance of the left brain, whereas I would say that the other side, is activating both sides of their hemispheres. So Cypher is pretty much like, why, oh why didn't I take the blue pill? You know, I woke up to this world of absolute shit and garbage. Why the hell wouldn't I want to stay in my illusion, my fantasy illusion of the world of artifice? So he's lost all the courage and all the willpower to face the real. He doesn't want to be a part of this world anymore. And he would rather, like I said, indulge in his hedonistic pleasures than to actually go through the rugged path of true awakening, which is symbolic of him going back to sleep. So this is all about either being awakened or going back to sleep. So he is literally asking for someone to put him back to sleep. Actually, kind of like a little baby. Also, he asks in this deal, or pretty much demands more like it, that that he is going to be rich and somebody well off, somebody famous. So this also ties in with that whole psychological mindset. One of the next scenes is Neo is being taken to the Oracle. Now we're going to talk heavily on the Oracle in part 2, so I'm not going to spoil that here, but there is a lot to the Oracle, and a lot of that actually doesn't come out until the sequel of this film. Neo meets a small boy who's capable of bending spoons with his mind, which is literally mind over matter, and this is because he's obviously been awakened, and I do believe that he's possibly a potential candidate of being the one. The lady that's there helping the Oracle says something to that effect. Neo is impressed by what this boy is doing, obviously, because the boy is obviously pushing his will upon this reality and changing it. So he goes to try to change it himself, and he's struggling with this. And the boy says, "Do not try to bend the spoon, that's impossible. Instead, only try to realize the truth." And Neo responds, "What truth?" And the spoon boy replies, "That there is no spoon." Meaning that you know that this is the Matrix, that the spoon itself is an illusion, that you have all the power. Going back to the Hermetic principle of mentalism. You know, that mind governs matter, but even in a digital realm, our minds govern the digital realm as well. As we see over and over in this film, we see another reflection, a reflection of Neo himself in the spoon bending. So to me, this is also saying that he must bend himself. He must bend his own internal mind to bend the spoon in the Matrix. So I feel that that's a very lost detail on a lot of people's minds, especially when it comes to mirror symbolism, because even when he walked into the Oracle's residence, you see another reflection of himself in the door handle. So keep an eye out for the mirror symbolism. And the boy actually states what I'm talking about, because he says, "Only then you will see that it is not the spoon that bends, but only yourself." Thus, in the mirror symbolism, you see Neo bending. So you have to change your mind and you will change the world. Be the change that you want to see in the world. So you have to change internally in your mind and in your heart to actually see the change in the external world. Neo finally meets the Oracle, and I will be discussing the Oracle's archetypal symbolism in great detail in the second part of this series. But in this section, we're going to call her the Great Intuitor. She's about the right brain aspects of intuition. She tells Neo to look at the sign above the kitchen door. And this sign is a clear reference to the Delphic Oracle in Greece. Again, revealing more occult aspects within the film. Since Neo represents the soon-to-become wisest man within the Matrix, he is archetypally corresponded to Socrates, who visits the Oracle at Delphi, which was the center of the Hermetic mystery traditions of the ancient world. The Oracle points to the sign above her kitchen doorway, where a Latin inscription Tenet Nosce resides. This translates to "know thyself," giving us more meaning behind the conversation between Neo and the Oracle, because Neo does not know himself. And I believe that the Greek inscription at the Delphic Oracle was, "Heed these words, you who wish to probe the depths of nature. If you do not find within yourself that which you seek, neither will you find it in the external. In you is hidden the treasure of treasures. Know thyself and you will know the gods and the universe, which has deep significance, especially to the idea of Neo, not only to ourselves, obviously. The most important part is to know the self in our physical world, but in the film, Neo doesn't think that he's actually the one. Thus, he doesn't know himself at this point. He doesn't know who he actually is. Thus, he's not the one. He hasn't unified himself. He hasn't aligned himself with who he truly is. This is a major problem in our own world. We've all forgotten who we actually are. We don't understand what consciousness actually is. And this is why we continue to create an ignorance, not only because the knowledge is readily available to understand ourselves and to understand what we're doing in the world, what we're manifesting, but also because we refuse to actually listen to the information that is present. We willfully refuse to know the self. Only when we know the self can we create consciously. The oracle states, being the one is just like being in love. You just know it through and through. She says, sorry kid, you have the gift, but it looks like you're waiting for something. Maybe in the next life. Who knows? So he hasn't directly built up the confidence in himself because he doesn't know himself. I feel that this is a great reference to people who do see what's going on in the world, but they still don't know themselves. And they don't realize that they actually have to do something to change the world. They actually have to step up and actually create different forms of behaviors. They actually have to step outside of their comfort zone and do something about what's happening. She hands him the cookie plate and tells him to take a cookie, that it will make him feel better. Now, this is really important, and it plays into the sequels quite a bit. This is more esoteric tech knowledge. HTTP cookies, also called web cookies, internet cookies, browser cookies, or simply cookies, are small blocks of data created by a web server while a user is browsing a website, and these cookies are placed on the user's computer or other devices by the user's web browser. Cookies are placed on the device used to access a website, and more than one cookie may be placed on the user's device during a session. Cookies serve useful and sometimes essential functions on the web. They enable web servers to store stateful information such as items added in the shopping cart in an online store on the user's device, or to track the user's browsing activity, including clicking particular buttons, logging in, or recording which pages were visited in the past. Most likely everybody who's watching this presentation already has seen all three movies. So we already know that the Oracle is actually a program in the system. So it's very interesting that she's giving him a cookie that tracks his data, that tracks his whereabouts. But it's also not just a tracking cookie. It's also a cookie that applies to essential functions of data within the system. So if we take from this that she's actually changing some of the coding within Neo himself and helping him along his path, because she is the one who is about prophecy within the system, then we can see that she's guiding him and helping his code to reach that full potential. But also one may say that, you know, there's a dark side to the Oracle, which we're going to get into later on, and maybe she's actually still part of the machine, part of the entire slave system, and we actually do kind of find that out in the sequel, and that this cookie is actually intended to, you know, fulfill the process of the one as we go through the trilogy. Now, I'm not going to spoil all that right now, but this does apply to this later on. So Neo and the crew are heading back to log out, and they enter into the temple because that's what it's symbolically associated as. And in this specific scene, it's being correlated to the symbolic reference of the fellowcraft, or the second degree. Now, obviously, I said that the first movie is a direct reference or an allegory of the first degree of Freemasonry, and that is true. But each scene can be broken down into finer parts, and in this scene, it is very obvious that it is a reference to the second degree. If you take a look at the slide, you can directly see the correlation here. You have a spiral staircase, which at the top you cannot see where you're headed to, alluding to the idea of kind of a leap of faith in a way. You don't know the destination, you just know that you have to continue down the path. or in this case, up the staircase to get to that destination, to go through that hallway and get to that door at the end. But also you can see that there's a checkerboard floor on the second floor, just as in the scene you see the checkerboard floor ends up on each floor of this temple. This is the scene where Morpheus actually gets caught and he sacrifices himself to actually save the crew, specifically Neo. And Neo was told earlier about this situation from the Oracle, where she had prophesied that Neo is going to have to make a choice, and we're going to get to that here in just a little bit as well. So yeah, Morpheus goes head to head with the agent, and this is also where Mouse, the individual who I suspect to be a double agent, pun intended there, right, actually dies because they've rewritten something in the Matrix. And the way that they find out they rewrote something in the Matrix is because they Neo specifically has deja vu. He sees a cat twice, specifically a black cat twice. Black cats have been symbolized as bad omens or bad luck for many centuries now. But there's also positive context to them. But in the Matrix, the film, it's about rewriting something in the Matrix. It's about changing the code. So the system has went in with administration capabilities or administration powers to actually change something in the system to trap them in this building. The second degree is about finding your true care. So we find out that Morpheus, he finally, shows how much he really cares for the One, and how much he really believes in Neo himself, because he extends himself to sacrifice himself, knowing that he's most likely going to lose in a one-on-one conflict with the agent. There's a very interesting correlation here with order followers being inside of the temple. And this is a direct reference, in my point of view, to the corruption of Freemasonry, allowing the dismantling of the mystery traditions from within by allowing people who believe in moral relativity and the belief in the erroneous idea of man's authority over other man within the temple itself. So this is a corruption, a data corruption, you could say, of the idea of Solomon's temple. So this is symbolically showing that the temples have been corrupted. The temple is also in a mangled condition. It's not in the best, well-kept condition. It's broken down. So this also can be alluded to the idea that the lodges have been broken down since the beginning, I would say, and that, having order followers in the temple is completely antithetical to the true teachings of morality, which is what Freemasonry is trying to teach. It's also a reference to the temple and the knowledge being under danger, in critical danger, and how we have to protect it. So this is all about protecting the hidden knowledge, the knowledge within the temple, or the temple of the self, protecting the individual's autonomy and protecting the individual's liberties and sovereignty. Since this all relates back to the internal self, we can correlate this to the lack of conscience within one's being, that we have these types of programs running amok within our own minds that must be dealt with. And that is because obviously the temple is also a reference to the individual. Cypher has his one-man mutiny, and in an act of betrayal ends up killing one of the brothers and wounding the other. He kills Dozer and wounds Tank, and in doing so he actually hands over Morpheus to the agents of the system. So Agent Smith sits down alone with Morpheus in this office building and references the Matrix system itself, this overarching system of control. To cut in here, I think it's very important to understand why the agents have their suits too. They're all in uniform. The tie also is symbolic of the noose. It also has origins with slavery, so there is some deep symbolism there. And Agent Smith says to Morpheus, "Have you ever stood and stared at it, marveled at its beauty, its genius? Billions of people just living out their lives, oblivious. Did you know that the first Matrix was designed to be a perfect human world, where none suffered, where everyone would be happy? It was a disaster. No one would accept the program. Entire crops were lost. Some believe we lack the programming language to describe your perfect world. But I believe that as a species, human beings define their reality through misery and suffering. The perfect world was a dream that your primitive cerebral kept trying to wake up from. The peak of your civilization. I say your civilization because as soon as we started thinking for you, it really became our civilization, which is of course what this is all about. Evolution, Morpheus. Evolution. Like the dinosaurs. Look out that window. You had your time. The future is our world, Morpheus. The future is our time. Now this reflects the poison worldview that most people have about our world. And to emphasize on this point, he goes on to say, I'd like to share a revelation during my time here. It came to me when I tried to classify your species. I realized that you're not actually mammals. Every mammal on this planet instinctively develops a natural equilibrium with the surrounding environment, but you humans do not. You move to an area and you multiply and multiply until every natural resource is consumed. The only way you can survive is to spread to another area. There is another organism on this planet that follows the same pattern. Do you know what it is? A virus. Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet. You are a plague and we are the cure. This is the idea of that poison worldview that a lot of people think. A lot of people think that human beings are actually a virus, on this planet. And to a certain extent, we have become a type of cancer to this planet. But the way that Agent Smith is portraying it here is a form of social Darwinian thing, or even just straight Darwinism, where it's survival of the most ruthless. Human beings are not a virus on the planet. It is the belief and our ideologies that have created a virus-like behavior onto the planet, which is a dramatic different approach than what Agent Smith is actually portraying here. The true virus is the control system masquerading as its own cure, which comes from the mouth of the agent, the control system, or the rules, which he represents the rules, right, himself. So this has the underlying philosophy that we desire to be controlled, that we actually want to be enslaved, that we are attracted to putting ourselves into positions of unnecessary suffering. And this is exactly what's wrong with a lot of people's mindsets. And this is what has perpetuated this system of slavery that we're currently living in. So yeah, he's not necessarily wrong, it's just his conclusions and his solutions to this are absolutely wrong. His understanding of human psychology is very limited. It's a very left brain approach to how the human psyche actually works, which is only part of the equation. Thus why his conclusion is actually incorrect. But this also has another kind of meaning behind it, which is that even though they had the perfect world where there was no suffering, etc., at some fundamental level, humanity instinctively and intuitively knew that they still were being controlled. So it's like living in a cage, but all your needs are met. Everything is perfect. You have everything given to you. You have everything to survive. So it's this perfect existence. There's no suffering, no struggles, etc. Everything is catered to you. And at some level, we probably intuitively knew that this was still a form of control. Even though that we're being well fed and well taken care of, we're still enslaved. So the way that they could hide that slavery is through actually putting it more out in the open, by making it a little bit more overt. So the system that they created, the new version of the Matrix, is actually kind of overt, but it doesn't give the entire picture. It just lets you believe that you're being oppressed by the corporate overlords and the politicians, etc., but not the people behind the scenes, behind the Matrix itself, the people who are actually in the real control, the dark occultists of the world. The only way that humanity will develop a natural equilibrium with the environment is by living in the correct understanding and application of natural law principles. This is the only way we can save our environment, is by understanding true principles and objective morality. So as we can see here, this gives more credibility to what I'm talking about, that the machines consider themselves to be the antiviral programs, to the world, that they are actually the ones who are there to save the world. But yet, when you see the real world, not only have the machines turn it into a wasteland, but so the humans have done that as well. So ultimately, Agent Smith here is trying to break down Morpheus's mind and give him his worldview, which is what the dark occultists have done. This is what sorcerers do. They want us to actually believe that, we are a virus. And as long as we believe that, then we will actually act upon that belief and then create certain systems and certain conditions because of that belief system. Agent Smith himself represents fear, hate, and death, but also he represents the control system, decay, entropy, breakdown, ego, narcissism, cataclysm. He's a proxy virus protection program and a virus himself. And these are the types of ideologies that he wants to implant into others. So Neo and Trinity go back into the Matrix to actually rescue Morpheus, and this is an allegory for rescuing truth. It's also the allegory for rescuing the mind. The mind is in danger, because he represents the mind, and he represents the potential for seeking truth, and he represents the truth itself as well, the one who reveals the truth. So this is all about rescuing a fundamental aspect of our consciousness. So in short, it's about keeping the truth alive. And there's a lot of themes in this movie about raising up to a higher elevation or a higher level, which represents raising in consciousness. So we see them take this elevator shaft up, and this is about them raising not only their motivation, their willpower, their resolve, but also raising their consciousness up to a higher plane of existence. This also can be a representation of climbing the hierarchy to meet face to face the people at the top of the pyramid, or in this case, the top of the tower, taking the elevator up to fight the elites. The cable can be related back to the noose of Freemasonry. I'm not going to explain that in detail here, but I do believe it has significance to towing, so it's about raising you up and pulling you up out of this lower level consciousness. So they finally rescue Morpheus with a helicopter and a really badass Gatling gun, obviously. The right of self-defense and to bear arms comes to mind when I watch this whole film trilogy, especially the scene where they ask Neo what he needs to actually go and rescue Morpheus, and he says guns, lots of guns. And yes, that is true. We all need lots of guns. Neo has to make a leap of faith to actually help save Morpheus. They both do, actually. So Neo has to leap across this gap, and he's tied. Again, there's that, rope symbolism coming into play here. He's tied and knotted to the helicopter, which is about higher consciousness, a higher up plane of existence. And Morpheus is shot in the ankle or the Achilles or the foot or something like that, and he stumbles and he's not going to make it, and Neo sees this, so they actually jump and they unify and grab each other and spin, and Neo ultimately rescues, Morpheus, who is the truth bringer, the truth speaker, So this is not only just about saving the truth, but it's about having the willpower, the courage to do what is necessary, and even possibly sacrifice yourself to do that. And it's about having the resolve, to do it no matter what. So this is also about extending yourself to come into harmony with truth. This is also a parallel to when Morpheus sacrificed himself for Neo. Now Neo has to sacrifice himself for Morpheus. After they rescue Morpheus, Morpheus says something to the effect that you're going to realize, just as I did, there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. And obviously this is pretty self-evident what that means. There's a lot of people who know the path, but never actually take a step on that path. They intellectually have that knowledge, but they do not actually apply it. The application of that knowledge is extremely important. The journey is of great significance to how we actually get to our destination. So walking the path is the most important. So after this, Neo, Trinity, and Morpheus are making their way to the subway. They end up in the subway, and they go for an extraction or a log out. Morpheus logs out first, then Trinity is going to tell Neo how she feels and what the Oracle told her. She decides not to, and then she logs out. But when she logs out, when we see this homeless guy he actually transforms into the agent, not only showing that anybody can be an agent yet again, but also he kind of babbles before this, which is kind of significant because the street that they're on is Babel Street. So it's a reference to Babylon, or to be a babbler, you know, a foreign language. And this can play into that computer jargon, again, with, you know, coding being a foreign language to a lot of people. And there's some other significance to this. I just thought it was kind of interesting that, you know, he kind of babbles and it's Babel Street. So nothing crucial, but Agent Smith eventually shoots the phone, cutting off Neo's exit plan and exit strategy. Neo has an option to run or actually to stay and fight Agent Smith. And at this point, he's developed the self-esteem, the courage, and the resolve to such a high extent that he's willing to stand up as one man to face the entire system, because Agent Smith represents the entire system at this point. So he's willing to take the action that is necessary no matter what and stand because he believes in himself. So Trinity is very concerned about this, and she's like, what is he doing? And Morpheus says he's starting to believe. And this is what happens, you know. Neo is starting to believe in his ability, in himself. We also see more as above, so below symbolism here with his arm movements, his gesture, with his kung fu stance. This scene is also significant because it has a throwback to a lot of Western style movies. And with this, we see, you know, trash blowing in the wind across the subway. And this is like a duel, you know, this is literally like a duel. But also this has Eastern significance as well, because this is how Eastern duels went down for the samurais, you know, where you had a standoff between one and the other. So there's a play on both here, but it's definitely looking more Western because it's dusty, it's more rustic, you know, you're in a subway. But also you're playing off of that right and left brain dialectic here within cinematography, because they're actually fighting first with guns and then with kung fu. So it's kind of gung fu, right? They start fighting with the guns and then they start into the kung fu. So they have this very intense battle where Neo actually starts to get the upper hand for a minute, and then Agent Smith pulls out, you know, some crazy, really fast punches and pretty much destroys Neo, and he's actually dying. You know, he's starting to bleed, and he probably has broken bones, damaged, you know, organs and stuff like that from what Agent Smith is doing to him. But he still doesn't give up. You know, they end up in the train tracks of the subway, and then Neo actually, you know, jumps really high and forces Agent Smith, who's on his back, choking him at this point, into the concrete roof above him, and then he gets away. He does a backflip, and then he gets away. And I find that this is all very significant of just never giving up. You know, no matter how the odds are against you, do not give up. Agent Smith ends up coming back. The train stops. He, you know, jumps out of the train and chases Neo. Neo is trying to find an exit plan. He ends up stealing a phone. So we see this, you know, this phone symbolism going on, which is the connection to reality. The phone represents the connection to the truth and to reality. So it's also about companionship and support groups, you know, people who are there to help you, because you need to reach out and communicate with people, because you can't just do this all on your own. That doesn't mean don't try, because that's obviously what that scene represented, you know, trying to do it on your own. But then he actually ends up back at the room where the movie began. And back at the heart of the city, you know. So this hotel is called the Heart of the City Hotel, and this is actually where the movie began and where the movie ends. So this is an Ouroboros. And as I pointed out earlier, 33 is the level or the illuminated degree of Freemasonry, which is the room number where he ends up. So Neo is shot by Agent Smith with his fancy Desert Eagle weapon that all the agents brandish, which I find is kind of interesting. But this is also about the 33rd degree, because the 33rd degree is about death and rebirth and resurrection, specifically to a new form of consciousness, a higher state of being. So he is shot and killed, and he is dead to this world of illusion. He dies within the Matrix, and then, he also is dying or dies in the real world because of this. In the next scene, he is actually brought back to life by Trinity through a pure act of love. And this represents that only true care, compassion, and empathy can actually resurrect right action, can actually develop growth within our neocortex to actually resurrect ourselves and have the second coming, the second birth of ourselves into a new state of awareness and a new state of existence and a new state of consciousness. So she represents the sacred feminine, like I explained earlier, and that's the only thing that can really bring about real change and resurrect true right action. When he's resurrected, Neo gains all these new abilities of the One because he's actually become unified now in his state of consciousness, and he can actually see the code. The code itself represents the language of the birds, or the twilight language, or what's also known as green language in some occult traditions. He can read the code as well. He's the most proficient reader of the humans of the code because he is fully activated. So he sees all the synchronicities. He can decipher all the coding and all of the programming. So green language can also be called the law of correspondence or synchronicity. It is the ability to look into words or codes or programs or symbolism and being able to pull out significant meaning that helps to align you to your path and helps you to make use of the world within you and around you. It is about understanding the hidden meaning within the symbolic representations of these forms and these frequencies or these codings or programs, etc. So it's about really being able to enhance your consciousness by seeing synchronistic patterns. So this is all about pattern recognition and being able to pull out meaning that is significant for being able to enhance your ability to deal with the situation that's going on, or enhance your state of awareness and your ability to do something about what's going on. There's a lot to green language, so this isn't an in-depth look at green language, but I do have a presentation coming up about green language itself, where I'm going to go over a lot of examples and explain puns and phonetics and philology and green language and all this stuff. But I just recommend looking into green language, or twilight language, or the language of the birds, as the Hermeticists put it. After he's resurrected, he only says one word, and it's the most important scene in the entire movie, and it's the lost word of the esoteric mystery traditions, and it's the lost word of humanity at this point. And you know what he says? He says no. And by doing this, he actually stops the digital bullets from hitting him. So this is the most powerful lost word. And in my point of view, this means that only when we stand up and say no, just like Neo has, to the control system, is the only time that will ever create real and positive change. I think this is very important to understand, that this is also about changing yourself in order to avoid bullets needing to be fired, because he doesn't use any guns in this. He just holds his hand out and says no. And I think that's very, very important, because all of my work and a lot of other people's work has always been to avoid any type of bloodshed. We need to get this done through the most efficient way possible, where we do not lose lives because of this. We do not want to seep into a bloody revolution. We want to actually educate people, because that's the only true long-term solution to these types of systems of control. Otherwise, they're just going to remanifest, and probably quicker than we've ever seen, because this is a new type of warfare that we're seeing. This is not the same old type of wars that we've had in the past. We are living in a very advanced society to a high extent, especially what type of technology that the governments are withholding from us, especially the military institutions and how the military agencies and how they're withholding these technologies from us. We're in a completely new territory when it comes to this type of warfare. So we really need to be very proficient and very strategic and very prudent when it comes to what we're trying to do. It is our right to act in self-defense, obviously, and that's what this movie is about, acting in self-defense. But we have to do this through the correct method. Otherwise, we're just going to end up right back where we were. This scene also parallels the scene we just saw with Neo and Agent Smith, where they're in the subway and they're standing off against each other. There's many parallels in these films, and that's something that you should definitely pay attention to. So we actually see that Agent Smith runs up and starts trying to fight with Neo. And symbolically, he ends up fighting Agent Smith, or the control system, with one hand behind his back. So it's become much easier for him because he has new sight, new vision, and he knows exactly what he must do in each situation that is, required of him, and how much energy he should put into that. Because there are certain things you can change and there are things that you can't change. And you have to have the courage to change the things that should be changed and embrace and accept the things that cannot be changed. Neo actually dives directly into Agent Smith's gut or being, and he actually blows him up from the inside. But before this happened, Agent Smith's neocortex actually lights up and bubbles up and explodes. And I believe that this is symbolic of destroying the system by reactivating our neocortex, by stimulating true growth within the neocortex. And the system cannot maintain that. It can't have any boundaries for that type of growth. And Agent Smith, his form, represents those types of boundaries, so it cannot contain the growth that is taking place within him because of an awakened being within him. Some people might say this is about taking the system down from within the system itself, but don't confuse that. It is, because we're all within that system, so it is about taking the system down from within it on a multi-layered fashion, but it doesn't mean join up with the government agents to take it down, obviously. The color green represents the Anuhata chakra throughout the movie, so it represents true care. Simultaneously, it also represents the system of control, so it's a double-edged sword. Green can represent goodness, like that of nature and things like that. It can also represent toxicity and stagnation. It can represent poison. Green represents growth at this level, though. We have to actually reach the people within the system through the heart energy, through true compassion, through true empathy, through the green frequency of care. So we actually would be able to avoid any type of really redundant and unnecessary revolution, a hot revolution as some people put it, by getting to enough people, by actually getting to enough people in the system and awakening enough people. That's the key. That's how we change the system without needing to fire one bullet. We have to actually get through to these people. So we have to make our case so sound and so powerful that it is capable of piercing through all the conditioning and all the mind control that people have been put under. We have to reach them at the center of their being, the center of their soul, and help them to see the path that they must take, to remove themselves from the wrongdoings that they're participating in within the system, and for them to remove their energy from such an immoral system known as government. We have to change the people's minds to be able to change the condition that we're all living in. We must have a mass paradigm shift in consciousness, otherwise there will be no change. And then a bloody revolution will become inevitable, which is something I do not want to see. But if it comes down to it, trust me, I'll be there for it. But I think we still have a chance to actually avoid that, even though things seem so out of control right now and so hopeless. I actually still have faith in our ability to actually make a difference. So there's one more parallel that I'd like to point out here. So when Neo is actually running from the agents, trying to reach room 303, his logout point, before he's resurrected, he's actually in this panic mode, right? And everybody in the crowd, like he runs into a crowd and he's panicking. He's like, oh shit, there's all these people that are potential agents. And he's just surrounded. And this is something that we all experience. Like, you go out in public and you're like, oh my God, all these people around me are actually agents of the system. Like the mass majority of these people are at least potential agents or are actually agents of the system who are in alignment with that which is immoral and that which is actually creating the slave system and that which is holding me under duress and holding all of us under duress. So we see a person turn into an agent and he starts shooting through the crowd carelessly, obviously, because they do not have care, they do not have the sacred feminine. But at the end of the movie, Neo actually comes out of the booth and he's in this crowd and there's all these people and he stands strong in that crowd without flinching. He's not in panic mode anymore because he's become awakened. And there's a contrast here. It shows this in the cinematography, obviously. So there's this parallel and this contrast going on between the two different states of consciousness of Neo. So he comes out and he's completely awakened and he's not worried about, who is actually an agent because he understands, he sees the truth. And now he knows his mission. His mission is to awaken these people and to set these people free. So Neo makes a call to the operator or the operating system, right? The control system. And he says, I know you're out there. I can feel you now. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how this is going to begin. I'm going to hang this phone up, and then I'm going to show these people what you do not want them to see. I'm going to show them a world without you, a world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries, a world where anything is possible. Where we go from there is a choice I leave to you. Spoken like a truly spiritually awakened anarchist. And this is all done over the scene of the system failure coding. And then it zooms in to the M and the F, which is the masculine and the feminine forces being unified. I don't think that's intentional, but I think that's synchromistic. And in between the M and the F, it's actually a doorway or a gateway into the new world, a new birth. Just as we started this movie coming in through that circle into a new birth, this is also the same thing going on. And this is also Freemasonry. So I'm going to end it here, obviously. System failure. So we have a movie that is highly influenced by the Kabbalistic tradition, the Freemasonic tradition, the Gnostic traditions, and we have an individual coming into his own, fully awakening into the light and the knowledge of himself and believing in himself to stand against the iniquities and inequities. And underlying all this stuff, we have multiple different philosophical and existential issues taking place, that both physically and metaphysically. It dabbles in many different ideas of the ontological nature of the self, epistemology, and eschatology. Neo, in an anarchic type of way, creating a new form of evolution within the system, rebelling against all the forms of authority and all the rules of that system to stand up and self-sacrifice so that great change may occur. I hope all of you really enjoyed this breakdown. I know it was a long one, but thank you for bearing with me. And the next part will be out very shortly. I look forward to continuing on with the next two films. I think I'm just going to put both of them into one part because they won't be as long as this part since all the foundations have been already laid in this movie. Thank you very much again, and please give this video a like and a share. And remember, each individual is the one in this matrix system. So log out for today, but make sure to log back in next time so that you can check out the next part in the series, Matrix Trilogy Deciphered Part 2.
That was awesome, huh? Yeah. much respects to Brandon Martin. Holy smokes, that was really good. First time I saw that, actually. I'm sorry, brother man. I slept on your wonderful presentation. Geez, like put that out a year or two ago. Yeah, that was really great. Definitely pulled out a lot of stuff that the showing that I did last night, Mark Passio's Decoding the Matrix. Yeah, they complemented each other so well. I'm really impressed and just like blown away. There's like so much to take in and consider and all these things. And yeah, I love how he brought in, the traditional Masonic teachings and traditions and the tracing boards and how they line up or stack up again, with certain scenes and things going on in the movie. So, wow, yeah, that was really cool. And just, yeah, the numerology, the 303, tying that to, 33rd degree, that kind of stuff. And yeah, I didn't know that the room 101 and like 101 correlates to fears, apparently. So, yeah, that's interesting. So, and yeah, like I'm not gonna nerd out like like a lot of movie reviewers do. I mean, there's like I don't know, like you can pick up a rock and throw it and hit someone that's like doing movie reviews on YouTube these days, but not at all in this fashion, because they haven't really initiated themselves into these esoteric teachings and that kind of stuff, and can like see these things in so many different perspectives and dimensions and layers to these things. It's like, and you could just sit back and like have just that much more appreciation and respect for the producers of this movie. Like, what the hell do we have? Like some one-dimensional piece of shit coming out of Disney or whatever the fuck these days. Like, holy smokes! Like Netflix, Amazon Prime. Yeah, more like a primate entertainment. Anyway, so yeah, going back to like the whole nerdiness, computer nerds, and gonna get a little binary with the codes of language now. No, just kidding. But yeah, it's just interesting how they, had this ongoing theme of, binary duality, rather, if you will. And yeah, that ties into the Masonic checkerboard, black and whites, and all these things. And what else did we see a lot? Passio and Brandon pointed out that a lot of times, in the new scene that cuts in, you see Neo how many times, waking up from a sleep or a dream or that kind of stuff. So that was really interesting. And yeah, just the whole idea of, the difference between being asleep and awake. Uh, you could take that to, the sleepwalkers, the people that aren't, actively aware of what the hell is going on around them, but also more importantly, what is going on within them. Yeah, like the Delphi thing, and yeah, that was really cool what he mentioned with Socrates and how that correlated with paralleled the same with Neo being Socrates and getting wisdom from the oracle and having that know thyself in what is it, Greek or Latin, on the top of the her kitchen wall there. So yeah, that was interesting. I mean, yeah, it's not dualistic necessarily, but masculine and feminine, and you have the oracle as the mother of the matrix in a sense, with the architect being the father. And it seemed like the architect was already there before the oracle came on the scene or was created, this program, right? Because they were talking about how the first matrix design, she wasn't included in that, but it was like a utopian type of construct. And utopia apparently means nowhere. Brandon Martin talked about this recently in his chat with Mario West, which was really great, by the way. But did y'all catch that? Even in the movie or in these reviews or, decodings, rather, of... So did y'all not question why humanity rejected, this perfect type of simulation mean, they're already like asleep, you know, but they're still, yeah, acting all like humans, right? So what is wrong with humanity in regards to choosing conflict and all these things instead of, you know, harmony? So that was just really interesting. And then, you know, that is really during the exchange with Mr. Smith and Morpheus, you know, when they have him captive and Morpheus goes on his monologue or whatever with how he despises humanity and all that stuff. And yeah, why? I mean, you see this today, you know, what's popular on YouTube now? Stuff that talks about, you know, just, you know, like you see the fucking headlines of these, you know, dumbass YouTubers. And it's not much different than, you know, the tabloids and newspapers that need these, you know, eye-catching, you know, titles and this and that, you know, such and such destroyed, or you know, this celebrity got ruined by blah fucking blah, like big fucking deal, you know. So, but that's what people are. They love the drama. That's what they're fucking, you know, wanting to be entertained by or some shit like that. What the fuck? It's sick. It's like almost parasitic, you know. They like to feed off of that negative energy. You fucking kidding me? But no, that's kind of like a reflection of the archonic parasites that are ruling over us and have us cut off from source. And so, yeah, it's unfortunate that, you know, we're not living in harmony with nature. I don't agree with Agent Smith in that we are like a virus and that we're just consuming anything in our path. You know, we're, you know, using up all the resources and multiplying and all this stuff. But that's kind of like the reflection of, and also the social conditioning and the mind control throughout the fucking eons in just human behavior and how we're not aligned to natural law. In the majority, there's 8 billion people around the world breaking natural law on a daily fucking basis. So it's no wonder that we're not living in a state of harmony and this and that. Even people within themselves, you know, from the micro to the macro, law of correspondence, you know. So anyways. Going back to duality, which is not the same as the law of polarity, although they're very similar and they share a lot of attributes. You know, so yeah, there's, you know, Neo and Mr. Anderson, and even within the Matrix, he's got his pseudonym Mr. You know, double life computer hacker at nighttime, but, you know, cubicle computer programmer in the daytime. So that's an interesting, I wouldn't call it a dichotomy, you know, but there's that. And then, yeah, obviously the two different personas, you know, whether in real life, you know, after he wakes up and gets unplugged, you know, like think of, you know, Zion, all that. But anyways, as opposed to their avatar in the Matrix or whatever. And then, yeah, humans versus machine, you know, left brain versus right brain, real versus artificial, ones and zeros, right? Binary code. Neo versus Smith, you know, and then it's just interesting how the whole quadrilogy played out and how Smith became like this doppelganger. Or was he one the whole time in a sense, as opposed? Yeah, sorry. It's, you know, Neo is the anomaly, and there's, you know, something within the program that is like the polar opposite of that, I guess, you know. So yeah, and then there's, you know, red and blue. That's a common theme throughout the whole thing, you know. Imagine taking both pills at the same time, right? I'm sure by now most of y'all seen that meme or whatever. But so yeah, going back to Brandon's wonderful presentation, man, he fucking killed it, man. I was really digging that, and just the play on words of, you know, deciphering the Matrix, and how there's a lot of, you know, ciphers out there. You know, this archetype of, you know, someone that's, you know, kind of woke up and this and that, kind of got disenfranchised, might have got brokenhearted, maybe just didn't put the right fucking work in during that time. And now he's, you know, pouting about it and jealous that there's a new guy on the scene, you know, who's trying to, you know, will his forced to become the one when maybe Cypher just couldn't hack it, hacking the Cypher. Never mind. So I don't necessarily think that Trinity rejected Cypher. I think, Cypher never really applied himself and tried to, like, hey, Trinity, you want to be my lady? Before Neo stepped on the scene. That's what I'm saying. It's like, so yeah, Cypher is brokenhearted. He's like, fuck, missed my chance. And so he's, directing all that stuff towards Neo and his situation and all that stuff. And he's like, just like, just eating this slob day in, day out. What the fuck, what the fuck for? My life sucks. And right. So yeah, there's just like, it's unfortunate with that lack of discipline and yeah, just being disenfranchised, even though, like, what the fuck? So he's, denouncing what Morpheus was talking about, the prophecy of the one and this and that, even though the one is currently being developed right in front of his fucking eyes. So the fact that, he's been just heartbroken and stuff, it's like blinding him to that, it seems. So yeah, and it's just like a mixture of like losing patience with the whole thing and just not seeing the bigger fucking picture. Just like, put your fucking heart and nuts in check and, save your ego shit put it to the side. So, the mission can be carried out, like, are you in this for freedom for all or just, your own fucking egotistical wants, needs, and whatever the fuck, like, do your shadow work, like, yeah. And so ignorance is bliss, right? But yeah, be less. But what about the play on words with are you feeling blessed today? Are you being less? That kind of stuff. So anyways, things to consider. And yeah, love what he considered in regards to cookies. Holy fuck. I'm not a big fan of sweets. I really took sugar out of my diet. Although you can sweeten it up with, like agave or xylitol, even maple syrup is great. But yeah, when the Oracle offers the cookie and stuff, and I'm sure you guys have seen some clips from the YouTube channel Matrix Explained, and that's what I'm saying. It's like they got good content. This guy goes deeper than most at the same time as well, bringing a lot of philosophical thought to the table and insights. But they just haven't gone into the esoteric and occult information that's out there, unfortunately, to really bring that more rounded perspective of what this movie is about and deciphering it and explaining it further. So he talks about cookies a little bit and how his theory was that it was kind of like how the Cupid with his love darts, it's kind of like that. The coating in the cookie was meant for Neo to like fall in love. Although, did he need that cookie or coating, whatever, to make that happen? Because Oracle was already saying, like, she likes you, like talking about Trinity and Neo being oblivious and stuff. And it's like, dude, how many girls out there do you think would be liking you? Like, how many girls are in your entourage already? So, like, yeah, not very bright is what her response was. But I'm sure he would have easily figured it out after the fact. But yeah, the whole cookie and, like, we got crumbs on our browser, we got to sweep them away and all this stuff. And looky on what the HTML and whatever the hell that's all about. So, yeah. That was really brilliant of what Brandon brought up with that, and just all these considerations with the Matrix and stuff, and yeah, like for those that watched anime and Ghost in the Shell, those are really great elements that just enrich this Matrix experience, I guess, if you will, in regards to like the lore of the movie and just pulling more insightful tidbits and stuff out of it, and reflections of society through other media and art and movies and anime and all these things, right? It's really interesting. That's pretty much all I got. But yeah, the whole so yeah, the Oracle, she's like the holistic side of the intelligence programs. Yet I'm going to stick to my guns on this, especially in this day and age where folks are allowing AI to do whatever in their household these days, or whatever, and all the smart tech, which is the acronym for, oh my god, I forget, but it's something along the lines of surveillance, all that stuff. I mean, do we really need a motherfucking smart refrigerator? The fuck. But yeah, I'm sticking to the guns, to the fact that like, there is no intelligence in the artificial, in this computer shit. There's no soul, there's no heart, there's no brain, right? There's intel, but there's not the generative principle, nor the I. Intel I gens, right? They lack that genesis. So there's nothing really holistic about them. But yeah, that's why I'm really trying to change my grammar. Every time I hear AI, I'm thinking about artificial or augmented intel, not intelligence, because it's a misnomer. And we can, denounce or reclaim that word through our own means and activations, through what I like to call the real AI, the activated individual, awakened individual, if you will. So yeah, just words of encouragement and empowerment, affirmations. And I appreciate y'all for having patience. And might just end it up on that. Just thinking about playing a little music. Any comments, questions before I sign off? Justice, it's great to see you. I don't know if you're still with me, but thanks for catching some of this. Theo Lukes, 3 times a charm, huh? He had to hit that Trinity for the trilogy. And yeah, so Brandon Martin will be putting out a part 2 sometime soon, hopefully. Other than that, oh yeah, fuck. Do I have that even? So while I'm looking for something real quick, my next live stream in this ongoing series with the Matrix stuff, I might do a intellectual pause. Although the music I mix is quite, mentally stimulating, if you will. I'm gonna do a replay of my maneuvering through the Matrix music mix that I concocted 2 years ago now. And yeah, that's pretty good. And I threw in some interesting themes, little cyberpunk stuff with some of the techno-ish beats, a lot of quotes from the Matrix, got that Merovingian for sure. What else? A lot of interesting quotes, some interesting songs about AI, and yeah, it kind of talks about escaping the Matrix, yet more about, all right, so I mean, just escaping isn't enough, and that's like a temporary thing. We have to dismantle and crush this fucking Matrix. I see the Matrix as like, the fucking cube, the Tesseract, the Borg, they're fucking little cube squared up in space, whatever the fuck. So, putain, mais j'en ai pas ça ou quoi? Fais chier. Attendez 2 secondes, les gars. Excuse my French, you know.
Château Aubryon, 1959. Magnificent wine. I love French wine. Like I love the French language. I have sampled every language. French is my favorite. Fantastic language. Especially to curse with. Nom de Dieu, de putain de bordel de merde de saloperie de connard d'enculé de ta mère. You see, it's like wiping your ass with silk. I love it.
You know why we are here.
I am a trafficker of information. I know everything I can. The question is, do you know why you are here?
We are looking for the keymaker.
Oh, yes, it is true. The keymaker, of course. But this is not a reason, this is not a why. The keymaker himself, his very nature, is a means, it is not an end. And so, to look for him is to be looking for a means to do what?
He knows the answer, but do you, Neil? I mixed that quote in a mix in the mix. I'll show that tomorrow, today on my time, because I'm 8 hours ahead of y'all in France. But I'm talking to the folks on the more West Coast side of things. Y'all want to hear some music before we end this out? Yeah, fuck yeah, he killed it. Allez, mon de Dieu, de putain de merde de saloperie, mais qu'est-ce qu'il y a, les amis? I never really translated that. Nom de Dieu, the name of God. Putain de merde, like fucking shit. De saloperie, like of bullshit. Des enculés, like ass fucks, if you will. And the last one is, you know, I don't like to say it because it's like along the lines of motherfucker, but someone in the process of doing that. And it's fucked up. I don't like dissing that mother spirit, but I don't mind dissing the the beta bitch spirit in there's tons of Matrix fans out there that are just, you know, all up in the mix with the in the metaverse, and you know, they got their virtual reality glasses on and this and that, when, you know, 20 years ago the first movie was warning them to avoid that shit, you know. Apple, Samsung, whatever tech company out there can sugarcoat this shit as shiny and delicious, artificially tasting as they can whip up, yet, you know, what is it really in the end? I don't think it's good. Although I can see some positive sides of this. But I'm going to end this off on a song by Mr. Traumatic. And yeah, he's not really having any of that whack shit in regards to, yeah, all these things that are meta now. And so let's check this out. I haven't seen this, so I'm feeling good about, you know, showing Brandon Martin's. I mean, I already knew it was going to be great, but it was the first time I checked it out in one sitting at least. And this is the first time I'm going to check out this song, which relates to this whole Matrix miasma minutia. So I'm going to end the live stream just after this song. And
imagine having to wake up every day knowing you are living a lie, but having to somehow pretend and go along with it. Imagine playing this game of make-believe simply because you think and feel you have no other choice. You feel trapped and helpless. Nothing is really changing.
In fact, it's getting worse.
For fuck's sake, the world's getting worse. If I kill myself, I'll write a letter first. Fuck off. I'm only joking, I'll just write a better verse. But fuck social media and fuck the metaverse. They want your consciousness to make it digital. You need to open up your mind and don't be cynical. Virtual reality is making people miserable, but everybody needs to be a bit more spiritual. Everybody needs to be a bit more quiet. I'm done with the bullshit, blood, I'm really tired. There's no point in a protest or riot. If you wanna change yourself, then change your diet. And if you wanna change, do it for yourself, not for no one else. You don't need no one's help. Cause if you wanna change, do it for yourself. Don't do it for your ego, do it for your health. The knowledge that I'm giving you is so divine. The wisdom in my mind is feeling so sublime. If you wear a mask, you need to grow a spine. I'm seeing GMO human beings all the time. I'm feeling EMF frequencies everywhere. In my city, 5G towers, I see many there. But no one seems to understand, no one ever cares. No one's on my wavelength, it's very rare. We live inside a holographic simulation. They're controlling you through fear and intimidation. They control you with the TV and the media. Their understanding of technology is way superior. They're into transhumanism. They're transforming humans and that's the new religion. Artificial intelligence is too forbidden. You need to go inside and meditate, the truth is hidden.
Waking up one day and realizing that the world you find yourself in is built on an illusion. Imagine realizing that everything you thought to be sacred and true turns out to be false. The systems, establishments, and authorities you trusted in turned out to be built on deceptions, meant to mentally and emotionally enslave you. Imagine having to deal with that realization, then trying to share what you have discovered with those closest to you, only to be mocked, ridiculed, and labeled as crazy. At first, all you can do is inspire others, complain or protest on the internet, but it seems hardly anyone is paying attention. Most of your friends and family distance themselves from you. You become the weird one in all your social circles. It's a lonely and depressing path you walk. But you choose to keep walking, for there is no going back. You simply cannot unknow what you now know. Then, one day, something beautiful happens. A real solution appears like a rainbow in the middle of a storm. Realize that you cannot fix the problem whilst you are inside the problem. You realize that you playing along is the problem. The greatest act of revolution is simply to say no and walk away. You quit that money grinding lifestyle. You quit that rent and mortgage lifestyle. You quit that bill chasing lifestyle. You quit giving most of your energy away to a system that does not serve your well-being. You leave the matrix and decide to go off grid. You find a plot of land, co-create a self-sufficient community, and begin the process of learning how to live a self-sustainable lifestyle. Once you taste true freedom, you can never be a slave again. Being free, sovereign, independent and self-sufficient, self-determined is so much more soul-fulfilling and purposeful. Your sole purpose in life becomes a mission to inspire as many other like-minded people to do the same. Break free from the systems that don't serve their well-being and start new cooperatives that do, communities that work in common unity. You are finally being the change you wish to see.
And like Morpheus would say, rest in peace, be the glitch that you wish to see in the Matrix. And that was a cool ending to that song. I will say that, it's not all about fucking, going off grid and, living, away from society and all that stuff. Like the Matrix will still exist, you're just not in it. But, and that's kind of the allegory of the movie The Matrix. Okay, we've escaped. It's kind of like when we unplug, we actually do learn the truth of things. We can't unlearn it. We can't unsee these things, right? So like once you're unplugged, that's it. Unless you pull a fucking cipher, you know, like betraying ass motherfucker. But yeah, so they exit out the Matrix, yet they keep going back in. For why? For what? You know, because the Matrix needs to be fucking dismantled, right? So yeah, like becoming more self-sufficient is great, and doing off-grid stuff is great. Although slavery will still exist. I'm definitely down to just, you know, walk away, not participate. Yeah, that falls into non-compliance for sure. And yeah, we have to build something better than the Matrix in its place for sure. But it's got to be fucking destroyed first and foremost for that to actually properly manifest and prosper. So think about it. I ain't got all the answers, by the way. You know, like I ain't trying to be up in here. I got a microphone. Like, yay, listen to me. I know it all. No, not at all. Like, you hear me showcasing other people's works because I'm learning from them as well. So I'm glad for y'all stopping by and learning with me. So it can all make sense and, you know, bust out of this Matrix type of shit. So more pieces to the puzzle so we can get that bigger picture nice and clear. Always remember to look back in the mirror and see what's going on over there too, because yeah, all the conspiraporn stuff, it's helpful to know about all these things, but if you're focused way too much out there and not in here, you know, think about it. So yeah, there's like that, it's like the tango of, you know, as within, so without type of thing. You know, we're understanding the world outside of us, but also the world within us as well. You know, get that proper inner gnosis, so we can navigate properly in and out of the Matrix, waltz in and out, if you will, like Mario West likes to say. And hope you'll have a great day. And that's all I got this time, and I'll be back